Testing, testing, 1, 2. Hello, hello, testing, testing.
Evening, members and members of the public. Welcome to the EPH meeting, our first meeting of the cycle. My first duty is to read the fire evacuation procedure for the evening. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of this room. Exit through the reception and meet in the War Memorial Park. And webcast of the meeting. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. And please switch your mobile phones off to silent. First, I'd like to welcome all the officers. I don't know if we could go around the officers and introduce yourselves, because there's new members here and members of the public probably like to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Longthorpe, I've joined the Council as the new Director of Regeneration. Good evening. Ellie Cole, Democratic Services Officer.
Joanne Bromley, Planning Policy Manager.
Matthew Melville, Planning Policy Team Leader.
Anne Shattuck, Principal Planning Policy Officer.
Thank you very much. So the first item is apologies for absence and substitutions. So we've got Councillor Goddison is replaced by Councillor Kay Watts. Councillor Robinson is replaced by Councillor Carr. And apologies is received by Councillor Hussey. So the second item is appointment of Vice Chair. Have we got any nominations?
I nominate Councillor Chloe Ashfield, please.
Yep. So we'll have a, please, Councillor Robinson, please show your hands. Thank you. And then we've got Councillor Ashfield, please raise your hands. Yeah, I was also voting as well. So. Right, thank you. So Councillor Ashfield has been elected Vice Chair of EPH. So I'm going to sit there. Chloe, yeah. Do you want to sit next to me? No. Item 3, declarations of interest. Is there any? No, it's good. Urgent matters. I'm not aware of any urgent matters. No. Item 5, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of March, 2023. So the members that attended that meeting, is that a true record? Yes. Do I have to sign anything, or just? I'll do it later. All right then. Thank you. Then item 6 is the local plan update, next steps and spatial strategy. So this is the start of the process. The Cabinet have decided to restart the local plan process after it's been delayed for a lengthy period. So this is the beginning of the process, and then the Cabinet will be making a decision in the autumn time after we've listened to members of the public. So we're open for debate and asking questions of officers tonight. So I'll let Councillor Conchescu introduce his paper, and then we can go into the public speakers after, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin by thanking everyone for joining us this evening. As we all know, the local plan is a vitally important document for our borough, and having such a strong turnout, both from councillors and members of the public here in this room and also outside just ahead of the meeting starting, shows how much we all care about the future of our area, and that's really heartening to see. The local plan is effectively made up of three parts: the housing number, the main set of policies, and the spatial strategy policies. This committee has already debated the second set of these elements, the main set of policies, at length, numerous times. I know that because I've been there. So today we're going to focus on the first and third elements, the housing number and the spatial strategies. I'll briefly share my thoughts on these with you to get the ball rolling, and it's summarising the paper in front of you. So we'll begin with the housing number. The reality is that local authorities have very little control over the setting of a housing number for their area. Despite the noises that are being made by government, the legal advice we get keeps telling us the same thing, that the standard method continues to dictate the number of new homes that we have to build, and that we don't have any exceptional circumstances that we can legitimately defend in front of a planning inspector. This isn't what any of us wanted to hear, but unless there's a significant change to the draft national planning framework, it's the reality that we all face. The standard method tells us that we need to be building 850 new homes a year in Basingstoke and Deane. As an administration, we don't agree with that number. As a council, we don't agree with that number. But the planning straitjacket prevents us from doing much about it. However, we believe that there is some scope to at least alter the timing of the delivery of the new homes. So that's why we've developed this stepped trajectory approach. This is going to result in us building fewer homes in the first 5 years of the new plan period to give infrastructure a chance to catch up before increasing house building in subsequent years. And I'm very keen to hear your views on that this evening. Next is spatial strategy. We're presenting tonight the spatial strategy that was proposed by the previous administration last year, just before the local plan update process was paused. That doesn't necessarily mean we agree as a cabinet with everything that's in those documents, but they're a useful starting point for our debate, and it will enable us to accelerate the timetable for the local plan update. I think everyone in this room agrees that we need to get on with that as quickly as possible. So I'm here this evening very much in listening mode, and I look forward to hearing your comments over what I suspect will be the next few hours. So thank you, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Now we can go on to public participation. Members of the public have 2 minutes to ask, well, say whatever you want to say about this agenda item. First on the list is Alistair Rudman. If you'd like to come and speak for 2 minutes.
There we go. I work in technology, so that's embarrassing. Good evening. So I'm a resident of Old Basing Village in the parish of Old Basing and Lichpit. I believe I speak on behalf of a significant number of people in the parish in objecting strongly to the 1,500 houses proposed for SS 3.6 and SS 3.7. You saw a lot of those people outside this evening. East of Basingstoke and Lodge Farm, you're proposing to increase our parish by a whopping 50%. It's absolutely huge. To you councillors, I think these are letters and numbers on a planning document, but to the residents of Old Basing and Lichpit, these are green fields where we exercise, where we walk, where we run, where we enjoy our ever-diminishing countryside. This land is home to over 30 endangered and protected wildlife species, sightings of skylarks, lapwings, lizards, 7 different species of bats, kingfishers, and even snakes, all about to be displaced and impacted by your development. The developers have described in their vision document that the 1,500 brick houses to be built on greenfield land will protect and enhance the natural environment, including the River Loddon, and they will enhance our green spaces. How will bricks and mortar do that? If it was not so serious, it would be laughable. The developers are taking the parish residents for fools. Indeed, a recent planning application was turned down by yourselves next to these developments for just 4 houses, because they would detract from the rural feel of the area. You're planning to build 1,500. So I welcome you to come to our beautiful village of Old Basing, meet the residents, and please listen to them. They'll tell you they're fed up of too many cars on our narrow roads, already a rat run to the A30, too few places in our schools, and weeks wait for appointments at the village doctors. The solution is not to increase the population by 3,000. I appreciate no one here, including everyone sat behind me, wants 1,500 homes built anywhere around Basingstoke, let alone in their parish. But there are better locations. The people of Old Basing and Lichpit want to live in villages, not a town. So please do the right thing, listen to the residents, and let us live in our villages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good timekeeping. Thanks. Next speaker is Alan Renwick, sorry.
I'm Alan Rennick. I'm a resident of Old Basing. The local plan has allocated 450 houses on land east of Basingstoke. Hampshire County Council wants to bring forward another 450 houses now. Instead of after 2029, which is the next local plan period. Tonight's consideration by yourselves is given to adding Lodge Farm, another 600 houses. As Alistair has just said, a total of 1,500 dwellings, a huge development, about half the size of Old Basing and Lichpit Parish at the moment. All this in a very constrained and sensitive environment, where development would have a significant adverse environmental impact. The proposals show poor and inadequate access to the sites. The A33 is already at capacity. There are significant adverse landscape, biodiversity and heritage impacts, and future residents would suffer from odours from sewage treatment works, as well as potential air pollution from the incinerator. Extensive building on these sites would conflict with social environment and environmental components of sustainable development, and yes, there is the River Loddon to consider. This is a north-flowing chalk stream, an internationally rare habitat, and has been designated by this council as a site of importance for nature conservation. And I haven't mentioned the floodplain. Thank you for listening.
Next speaker is Nick Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I too want to express my concern about the inclusion of the land east of Basingstoke and Lodge Farm, sites SS 3.6 and 3.7. They're within the draft spatial strategy and the local plan update, and together, as you've heard, they aim to deliver 1,500 new homes in the existing parish, which only has 3,000. At Appendix 2, page 21 in your brief, it takes 10 pages to outline the vision for this land, including extensive mitigation measures to protect the River Loddon, manage the enormous traffic increase on the A33, the vital rural countryside, and the increased demand for schooling. Worryingly, there are other areas of concern. I see terrible danger here. Even if each individual mitigation was actually delivered fully and sustainably by developers accepting the high costs involved, these sites, when complete, would utterly overwhelm the existing communities. My concern is that these mitigations will not, in fact, be delivered, that they are a dream, not a vision, and that the risk of not delivering each, when multiplied together, will create an enormous risk and spell disaster for this part of the borough. The river will die. The poor new residents sold this dream will suffer a lack of amenities, diverse health effects from the sewage treatment plant and the incinerator, and the huge scale of actual traffic, as opposed to that of the dream, will overwhelm local highways, roads, and narrow lanes. We will all wish it had never been allowed, and councillors, I implore you not to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Chris. Next speaker is Mike Dearlove.
Hello everybody, I'm Mike Dearlove from Dummer. In the early part of this year, with Stafford Napier and Julian Jones, the chairman of the Parish Council, Dummer Parish Council, we undertook a review of all the draft policies presented to EPH for the local plan update. We submitted our comments to and had a meeting with Joe Bromley and Councillor Konecko's predecessor to discuss some of them. One of the key issues we identified related to the policies were significant developments proposed for South Manydown, including the SMB land and Popham Garden Village, and in particular requirements for infrastructure planning. I believe we all understand the concerns relating to the need for adequate infrastructure being available when needed by new and existing residents. The policies, as proposed, only mandate the need for an infrastructure delivery strategy to be provided with each full or outline planning application. We believe this to be far too late in the process for these major developments and introduces significant risk, not just to the plans for these sites, but to the overall success of the local plan. The example of the house building restrictions imposed on the Basingstoke Golf Club site because of insufficient sewage pipework capacity highlights the impact of poor upfront planning and the failure to get the appropriate statutory body commitment in advance. To minimise the risks, we ask EPH to insist that the infrastructure delivery strategy and phasing plan for these sites is made part of the master plan process. This will help to ensure that the plan is deliverable and provides what is required to support the needs of all residents. In this way, all funders and suppliers would have to be fully engaged in the master plan and obviously the success of the master plan. The infrastructure delivery plan document is a good start, but the relevant items need to be incorporated in each site's master plan with timescales, funding sources and responsibilities. Thank you.
The next speaker is Tadley and Pamba Rural Protection.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kevin Chapman from the Tadley and Pamba Rural Protection Group. I'm representing about 400 supporters this evening to say that the Skates Lane development is in the totally wrong place, in a beautiful area of countryside, and we're supported in our aims to take it off the plan with expert opinion from people like Alan Albury, the historian, Paul Sterry, the naturist, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, the Hampshire Biodiversity Team, the Tadley Historic Society and the County Archaeologist. None of these people can understand why on earth this site is actually being put forward. Looking at some history, it's sort of come and gone a number of times, but it seems to be back on the cards now. It was put forward originally by Bewley, the developer, recently gone out for public presentation of their proposals. So they put it onto the issues and options back in 2020. It was on the Sheila, but with the note that it wouldn't go forward on the basis that it was outside the settlement policy boundary for Tadley and was constrained by the DUPZ. Later in 2021, a planning policy officer left Basingstoke and Dean and joined Bewley, and then we went through a period of a number of consulting reports being produced that put Skates Lane back into play, so to speak, saying that the constraints from the DUPZ were not applicable, and also in terms of the environmental impact assessment, there was a company called Woods, who I've never heard of before, but they said that there would be zero effects on biodiversity and traffic and health, which is absolutely astounding. Nobody can believe it. So it went forward to the draft spatial strategy. Tadley may be suffering slightly with this development in that there is no neighbourhood plan, but nevertheless there's a lot of interest locally, obviously, to take things forward. So Skates Lane was on the draft spatial strategy in June 2022. In November, December of 2022, the Atomic Weapons Establishment and the Council were undertaking their 3-year statutory review of the DUPZ location. And they discussed at length whether 4 or 5 houses in Borehurst should be within the zone or outside the zone. They didn't talk about 300 houses in Skates Lane at all, which is just astounding. So, going further, back into June 2023, Bewley...
Please, can we sum up, please?
Yep.
Thank you.
The public proposals were made by Bewley, the developer, and they were absolutely ridiculed for their errors on everything to do with the heritage of the area, the biodiversity of the area, not even recognising that the area is bounded by 2 SSSIs, 3 sinks, 2 conservation areas. So all of these things were failed. And with their request for screening opinion, there was 81 objectors to that, even though there was no public consultation, but it is just at the level. So we believe strongly that Skates Lane is a development in the middle of the countryside, would be creating a totally new settlement outside of Tadley and next to Little London. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is David George.
Good evening, Chair. I'm not David George.
No.
I'm Gareth Kapner. I'm the first of the 3 Whitchurch contingent.
Oh,
and I thought you would want to have it in terms of a chronological presentation.
Fair enough, no problem.
If you're happy with that.
Yeah, sure.
Good. For members who don't know me, I'm Gareth Kapner. I'm Chartered Town Planner of 58 years standing, and I'm the planning advisor to Whitchurch Town Council. I opened the report with some surprise and dismay. Councillor Minnis-Band wrote to the Secretary of State on March the 1st, 2023, on behalf of all political groups, requesting that the flawed and simplistic standard method is removed from the planning system, as it relied on out-of-date demographic projections and their artificial inflation by the application of an unjustified affordability ratio. The House of Commons Levelling Up Select Committee, in its report published on July the 14th, 2023, concluded, quote, that the standard method formula is not currently fit for purpose. Instead, a single standard method formula that accounts for local housing need and capacity should apply to all local authorities. The Planning Officer Society, Basingstoke Council is a member, has set out in their manifesto a new standard method. They reject the use of out-of-date and estimated 2014 Office of National Statistics projections. But I am pleased to say that at last, help is now at hand. On the 21st of September, in 2 weeks' time, ONS will release the data that will enable us to carry out our Chelmer model run. I would hope to engage with Joe Bromley to agree a base date and a projection date, together with interim dates and base year commitments and windfall capacity, to identify the possible scale of future provisions for further debate. The projection may be higher or lower or the same as current estimates, but it will be based on an up-to-date and surveyed data, which will give you the most accurate projection as far as can be achieved. This figure could be used in the phasing of strategic sites towards the end of the local plan update period to allow infrastructure catch-up. We will definitely not be proposing to artificially increase this figure by 33%, as required by the standard method, since, in the words of the Planning Officer Society manifesto, quote, the affordability factor makes no sense, unquote. In my view, this meets the test of the most recent letter dated June the 23rd, 2023, from a local plan examination inspector who says, quote, whilst it is open to me to find that the plan should not meet all of the identified need through the application of the NPPF, if it were sound to do so, I do not have the evidence to determine what the housing requirement should be. Our forthcoming Chelmer Run, I hope in association with Joe, will give you a sounder basis for discussing the borough's future housing requirement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So who's coming next, Tracy or David? Tracy?
David. This way.
Well, who knows these days, eh? Sorry.
The day's changed. Okay, thank you, Chair. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tracy Woodruff, Chairman of Whitchurch Town Council. I welcome Councillor Konechko's invitation to raise concerns about the draft spatial strategy as set out in paragraph 2.9 of the report, as insufficient sustainable sites exist in Whitchurch. In paragraph 3.31, the local plan update figure of 310 dwellings for Whitchurch has again been put forward. In the light of past and current events, it is now time to challenge this figure head-on. Since the inception of local plans, our small historic town has been the recipient of high levels of housing growth. The current local plan requires 350 houses to be delivered in 15 years, the highest figure of any rural settlement, which we have achieved and slightly exceeded. The current version of the local plan update requires another high figure of 310 houses in 10 years, which is an increasing rate of growth. The only stepped trajectory for Whitchurch is immediately upwards. Our Neighbourhood Plan Review Group has been working away for over 2 years identifying the environmental capacity of the town, which is subject to multiple constraints, including the North Wessex Downs A&OB and its setting, the River Test SSSI and its floodplain, and the existing town and rural conservation areas protecting important open land. The Town Council has identified the last greenfield site to the south of the town, which is the subject of the application to extend the existing Mill Springs development by about 200 houses. This is currently with your authority and which will contribute to your 5-year land supply shortage, along with the yet-to-be-started 60 houses at Upper Evinger Road. The recent Genco application at Beer Hill to the northeast of the town, which has multiple serious constraints, has confirmed there are no more acceptable greenfield sites in Whitchurch, whilst brownfield sites have already been taken into account in the current neighbourhood plan. Consequently, Whitchurch Town Council will strongly resist the current proposed figure of 310 dwellings for the additional local plan update period. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. David.
Thank you. For those of you new to committee and don't know me, my name's Dave George. I'm a hydrogeologist and deal with all watery matters, basically. I read the documents and I thought, we've been here before on this, about 10 years ago when the existing local plan was produced. At that time, the inspector expressed really well-founded concerns about the delivery of water infrastructure, and at that point a memorandum of understanding was produced, basically with Thames Water to deal with these matters and to help push the local plan through. As recently pointed out by Councillor Cubitt in the meeting a little while ago, the memorandum of understanding was never effectively implemented, as far as I'm aware, has never taken into account in development decisions, and despite the quality of the water, Loddon being downgraded during this period, which has never been used. And the MOU, interestingly, if you go through the local plan, it's not even mentioned in there in any way. No, it's not tied to it. So we seem once again to place our faith in the water companies to deliver the necessary water supply and wastewater in a timely manner. And despite really the poor record of the water companies and external consultants clearly expressing severe reservations as to the delivery of their proposals. Before doing this, could I ask the councillors really consider the following? How will the memorandum of understanding, the proposed memorandum of understanding, be linked to policies in the plan? What measures will be included in the plan to ensure the provisions of the memorandum of understanding are implemented? How can the memorandum of understanding be implemented given the 3-year interval of environmental agency monitoring results? What will the consequences be if the memorandum of understanding is not delivered? Will the local plan be informed by the MOU? And I understand it's going to be a water cycle study addendum. Or will the MOBU finalise during the Regulation 19? So those are some of my principal concerns. If none of these are available or done, well, what's the point of it? Will it be ignored again? That's my concerns. You clearly made a lot of progress and congratulate the team in having the courage to include a gramping clause, I think is now there in ENB 9. But note, this applies to capacity rather than need to protect water quality, so it only covers capacity. Unfortunately, also a number of the other existing policies, despite looking good, also have a very limited applicability in practice. I think that's the point. I welcome the proposals for working groups to focus on some of these issues and will be very, very happy to support them in any way I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Martin Bierman.
Good evening. Am I ready to go? Right. Thank you. I will say I prepared my thoughts before I heard the cabinet member saying we were talking mainly about housing, but I was addressing the whole report as it appears on the agenda, so I stray a little beyond that. And I certainly haven't read all the 230 odd pages, so if I say something that's already in the report, please forgive me. For a start, I welcome the report's implication that it's going to look at east of Basingstoke, or what I call east of Chinham correctly, and Lodge Farm as one sort of area. I think it only works that way if one's going to put it in at all. But if before so doing, one's got to look at the impact of the incinerator and the sewage works, both of which were built where they are with a view to keeping them away from development and housing. And of course now we've crept much closer, and it hardly serves what was intended in the first place. The only positive, one might say, is that the incinerator could offer district heating, but I would suggest that that isn't a good enough reason to build the rest of the houses and make future residents suffer, as they certainly will beside the sewage works. And I certainly know that Thames Water don't look forward to all the complaints they're going to be getting from neighbouring housing. Seeking to have a well-serviced bus route along the spine road of Site 36 through into Pyatt's Hill and onto Barton's Lane gives the already challenging road junction an even greater challenge, and is asking for serious trouble. And that will get even more so when the bus gate, which will, I'm sure, be widely ignored and is just offered as a cure-all, which won't do the job, because it'll provide a lovely short cut through from the A33 into Old Basing and beyond. So I have no faith in the bus gate. Whilst we're talking about transport issues, the excellent Basingstoke and Dean transport strategy, published as far back as 2019, and offering such things as rapid transit systems and so on, is only mentioned in support of some of the transport documents or transport solutions. It isn't a base document on which the whole siting of sites should be considered before various routes are precluded because of housing being in the wrong place. So that should be much more evident in the report. And where is the reference to the Chinham railway station? I do welcome the electrification of, or the suggested pressure to electrify various mainline tracks. That's very welcome. And whilst the draft infrastructure delivery plan contains some very worthwhile proposals, why is there not a section specifically on climate change mitigation or, say, energy? Why does the section on water not include a stipulation that all new build shall include rainwater harvesting, something easily done if it's not done retrospectively? And generally, just more generally on climate things, I've missed it, it might be there, but I don't see much reference to solar PV. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Martin. Portfolio holder, would you like to respond to any comments raised?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of the speakers. The first speaker suggested this evening that perhaps all of this was just letters and numbers on a planning document to us as councillors, and I'd like to assure him and everybody else in this room and watching that that's absolutely not the case. It's not the case for me, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody else on both sides of the table that they share those same sentiments. The messages have come across very loud and clear. East of Basingstoke, Lodge Farm, Skates Lane, Whitchurch, got those, thank you. South Millie Down, Pop and Garden Village, concerns about the infrastructure there as well. Thematically, some interesting points coming around biodiversity, infrastructure, water quality. Those are all things that we as a cabinet are aware of and are working on. I'd like to respond to a couple of specific points as well, if I may. So, Gareth, your point about running the Chelmer model, we've got consultants prepped and ready to go. So as soon as those figures are released by the ONS, we will look at them. As you're aware, we're not allowed to use the Chelmer model. We have to use the standard method calculation. However, We'll still run the numbers, and if they support our case for reducing housing numbers, if they support our case in terms of slowing down the quantum of house building, we will definitely use that to our advantage. Dave, you made a couple of points about water quality, the memorandum of understanding. We are working on those with the water companies as we speak, and we will link those to the local plan policies. Timing-wise, I can't promise you that they'll be done in time for Regulation 18. In fact, I suspect they probably won't, because we do need to crack on with the Regulation 18 consultation. But I'd be very disappointed if they're not ready in time for Regulation 19 by the time they go to the inspector. And with the Grampian clause, noted what you said, we'll look into that, because I think it's a fair point. We have introduced a Grampian clause into the latest draft of our policy documents. But if it can be strengthened, then all the better for it. Martin, thank you for your comments there again about East Basingstoke Lodge Farm. You spoke about Chilham Railway Station, you spoke about climate change, you spoke about rainwater harvesting, PV. That's all dealt with elsewhere in the local plan. It's not something we're dealing with specifically tonight, because we're looking at the housing numbers and the spatial strategy. But I can assure you all of those issues are being addressed elsewhere, and you'll certainly see that as part of the Regulation 18 consultation. And I think that's all of the major points covered. So thank you all again, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Now I'd like to invite visiting councillors to make their comments. So you have 4 minutes. The first on the list is Councillor Tomlin.
Evening members, officers, chair, thank you. I'm here tonight in my Bramley Ward councillor capacity. I've got 2 sites that I want to discuss with you, or put something to you. The first one is SS 3.9, which is land to the west of Upper Cuffolk Farm. So going straight into it, this allocation generates more housing to the growing north and south Bramley, the village of Bramley divided community, with potential issues of a sense of place where people perceive they actually belong, because you've got a polarised settlement. It's an isolated site, seen as a cul-de-sac with one way in, one way out, and it's creeping along the side of the strategic gap, which is in page 109 of your agenda pack. The strategic gap for Bramley and Chinham is in fact MOD land, and it's highly unlikely ever to be developed, and so it's not really helping with the coalescence between the settlements if we're going up the side of it. In terms of the climate emergency, this site really isn't sustainable. It's totally reliant on cars as a means of transport. It's sited too far away from local services. And in the policy box on page 37, little subletter D, ensuring development will not have severe adverse impact on the local highway. In a statement, when the Upper Cuffolk Farm site was given outline planning permission, HCC said, in light of the junction improvement works already completed, HCC Highways have concluded that it would be more appropriate to provide improvements to sustainable transport modes in order to mitigate the impact of development traffic from the Cuffolk Farm site. This includes the provision of a new bus service which will operate and a contribution towards Basingstoke cycle strategy, etc. This approach recognises the limited scope for additional junction capacity improvements on the local highway network, in particular following recent upgrades on the A33. So unfortunately that's fanciful in the extreme, but the statement does identify the A33 constraints. HCC has a poor delivery on such solutions. The bus service we have in part of the area is temporary unless it can be subsidised or it becomes a viable commercial operation, but it just doesn't happen. The Chinham Business Park, which is where the traffic will all head, it wasn't designed for through traffic. It's a fast developing into a warehouse park with frequent HGV traffic alongside business traffic. Then site access onto Cuffolk Lane for cyclists to go to the national cycle route. There will have to be SAS training compulsory due to the poor sight lines and the twisty and busy lane. And inevitably more traffic will use this lane. We touch again on the subject of a lack of ongoing infrastructure. It's a long walk to the Chinham shopping centre, over 3 miles. Doctors, Bramley and Chinham are at capacity. It's not walkable for elderly or children. Schooling, we've got no idea whether Upper Cuffolk Farm or land to the east of Basingstoke will provide any new schools. Haven't a clue. And again, ecology and biodiversity times, many species exist, and how we will actually achieve a 10% biodiversity gain is beyond me. And then Sherfield Hill Farm, which is SS 3.8. This is, again, going to coalesce Sherfield Loddon with Chinham and Sherfield Park. Generates a north-south Sherfield and Loddon community, very much like I talked about earlier. It will absorb and lose the identity of the Church End settlement, and it'll have an impact on local highway, and there again, the lack of infrastructure. The A33 is a major trunk route between the M4 and the M3, and more locally, the Reading area and the M3 towards Southampton. Dual carriageway through Berkshire, but single carriageway through Hampshire until it reaches Chinham. It carries heavy goods vehicles. As an example, from the distribution centre in Reading, there is a Tesco's HGV lorry every 2 minutes. Heavy commuter traffic, even at weekends, it will cause queues at the many roundabouts through Chinham onto Sherfield on Loddon. Recent developments at Redlands and Sherfield Park have added yet more local traffic. Whitmarsh Lane takes all of Basingstoke's waste to the incinerator for burning, or onwards travel to the recycling centres in Hampshire. Thames Water sewage traffic, they're tankers. It's a busy road, accidents are frequent, total road closures are often caused, and it causes massive rat running. And many speed limits are in place to reflect the dangerous volumes of vehicles. So our air quality will soon become a serious issue. So HCC will still keep on allowing us to use more traffic on this road. So I would ask you to consider all of these points when you look at these two sites. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chris. Next speaker is Councillor Godderson.
Right, good evening, committee. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to address the committee. I'm here tonight to ask you to recommend to Cabinet that SS 3.7 should not go forward in this update of our local plan. In support of this request, I would like to offer 3 pieces of evidence. Firstly, in 2011, when our local plan was being put forward, the Environment Agency recommended strongly that this site should not go forward. At that time, that recommendation was accepted and the site did not go forward. The reasons that they identified for forming this view, which justified their recommendation, still exist today. Nothing has changed. The second point that I'd like to make is, and this has already been partially raised by Martin Bierman, when the Basingstoke Development Corporation drew up their plans for Basingstoke, they deliberately cited the sewage farm in its current position, as they stated it would need to be as far away as possible from human habitation due to concerns regarding odour and human health. SS 3.7 is downwind and right next door to the sewage farm. How many of you would like to live right next to a sewage farm? My third point is this. Over the last few years, we have all become more concerned and knowledgeable on matters of biodiversity, environmental matters, and the quality of our many and varied streams and rivers. We have many rivers in our borough, all of which are very important. But I think it's fair to say that the Tess and the Loddon are in a special category. The government itself has become concerned of late about water quality in our rivers, and the Environmental Act of 2021 and the 2023 Government Improvement Plan have both been passed to help deal with these issues. Goal 3 in one of the acts states that the government is fully committed to the restoration of the headwaters of chalk streams. If I may finish off by drawing a small analogy, a doctor is concerned about his patient's health. He suggests a change in his lifestyle.
the recommendation is not accepted. The inevitable happens. In this example, the only loser is the patient and his immediate family. In the case before you, 3 separate bodies have given their opinions and provided evidence as why they should feel that Lodge Farm should not be developed. Those opinions will have an impact on future restaurants of our borough if their recommendations are refused. Their quality of life will be impacted. There will be no going back whatsoever. We all have a responsibility to our future residents. The choice is yours. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sven. Next speaker, Councillor Morrow.
Everyone's going to do that tonight, aren't they? Right. Thanks, Chair. Right. I'm speaking tonight as Ward Councillor for Tadley North, Kingsley and Balcast. First up, I would like to express my support for pressing on with the local plan. We must do what is within our power, and that is hard. That is work hard on delivering a local plan with the strongest possible policies, to build the right homes in the right places and encouraging the building of energy efficient homes to keep fuel usage down. In May, we inherited a paused local plan and a 4.2-year land supply. This has left the borough in a weak position as a planning authority, and it leaves us open to speculative development. Ashford Hill is a small village of around 100 houses. It used to have a shop, pub and a school. It now has 35 new houses and 27 more are being built. However, the shop and pub are no longer there, and there is no bus service in the village. 2 further applications are going to appeal for 36 and 47 more houses. There is no main sewage in the village, and drainage issues are a major environmental concern. A strong local plan and strong policies are essential to stop unsustainable developments at the planning stage, and a 5-year land supply is crucial to strengthen our case at appeal. Moving on to the spatial strategy, where I must speak on Skates Lane. Due to the proximity of the AWE and the evacuation zone, Tadley is an oddity to the planning process. This does not mean we can lower our standards for site selection due to a lack of options. Skates Lane was not supported in the 2020 Sheila, was due to its countryside location and its proximity to Aldermaston AWE. Skates Lane isn't your normal large drab farmer's field. It's truly old farmland. It is a collection of small hedge-lined curved fields used to graze sheep and keep pigs over the years. Even our biodiversity officer cites the grasslands, the least biodiverse area, as important habitat corridors. Generations of old Tadley and Pamber families have walked the footpaths and enjoyed the untouched and unspoiled environment. You could align family photos throughout the decades and the backgrounds would remain the same. For a small plot of land fitting only 260 houses, it's sandwiched between 2 conservation areas, 2 SSSIs, bordered by 3 sinks, 2 listed buildings, a waterway, 3 ponds, wrapped in ancient woodland, crossed with established hedgerows and hides a buried Roman road under the surface. No neighbourhood plan would select this site as a place for a housing development. Skates Lane is more suited to be a biodiversity improvement zone than a development. My final point is that the plan is to complete the first homes by 24-25 and the last in 7 years' time, which takes us to 2031. This is not going to help solve our 5-year land supply, but it will have a sustained impact on the environment and residents will lose their leisure amenity. Skates Lane was not considered viable in 2020 I don't believe it fits with our local plan policies in 2023. I would like to see it removed so that the site can be preserved and the long and important wildlife corridor stretching all the way to Ashford Hill protected. On top of that, I mean, some of the things you see, there's a mix with the mixture of habitats. We get kites, linnets, whitethroat, chiff, chaff, blackcap, goldfinch, swallows, cuckoos, dormouse. I've forgotten the species of dormouse. It's a hazel dormouse. That's the one, which is special because they need roots to get up to the trees. And yeah, and also there's 2 habitats there. National priority habitats, purple moor grass and fen pasture. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Councillor Johnston. Sorry.
Right. Hello, everybody. In keeping with the aspirations of the new local plan, I ask that Skates Lane be excluded. As a council, we seek to prevent the further destruction of the character and utility of our villages and small towns. Tadley has been built to its capacity and has a poor infrastructure. The proposed Skates Lane development could expand the population in the ward by up to 10%, which would bring our already struggling community to a standstill. Following the screening request, expert opinion objecting to the development of this site can be already found on the planning portal. The 2022 Sheila states, the site currently does not meet the council's own current planning framework, as it is outside of any defined settlement. The Sheila goes on to say, the general principle of development on this area is not supported. Biodiversity. A biodiversity net gain would be challenging for any developer, as the destruction of the ecology that has taken centuries, if not millennia, to mature would be immense and not be offset by the planting of a few hedges in a decimated countryside. Once this landscape has been destroyed, the borough will lose one of the last pieces of natural England, forming a wildlife corridor linking Pamber Forest to ancient woodland directly adjacent to the development site. Adders, smooth snakes, bats, newts, I can go on and on, live side by side on this site. This is because the land has been left in peace over the centuries with no heavy ploughing or intensive farming. Now, heritage. I hold postgraduate qualifications in history and archaeology, including a PhD. I say this to endorse the concerns that have been raised with me by my residents. The site is not of low archaeological potential, as we are perhaps being led to believe. Neither is it of high archaeological potential. Instead, it is of a factually certain archaeological significance. Its proximity to Silchester and the placement of the Roman road through it, the Portway, could even be of national import. There have been 2 recent reports of residents adjacent to the site identifying possible Roman remains on their properties. They may be wrong. However, this land should not be entered into the local plan without an independent analysis, preferably from the university. The Park Pruitt development sets a precedent where the Roman road was left intact throughout the housing development as a green ribbon. In the case of Skates Lane, this might affect the viability of the site, but without such protection, the Roman road and any other contextual archaeology will be destroyed. In 1997, the County Council ruled that the Skates Lane farm track could not become a road and was to remain an access route only. This county decision was upheld on appeal, and if upheld into the future, this could make the site impractical, as Skates Lane is the only viable route out onto the main road. 25 years on from the county decision, which was based on road traffic, the road struggles even more, being the main entry and exit route for Tadley. A potential addition of some 700 cars would bring egress to a halt during rush hour. Road usage would also be exacerbated as the site is too distant from bus stops or facilities for the residents to access them on foot. Now last, roads are of particular importance to the DEPZ and the emergency evacuation plans out of Tadley. An addition of 10% to the population would need analysis. It would be disingenuous to say DEPZ isn't relevant because only a small part of the site is in the current zone. Evacuation and emergency planning will need to be reconsidered in the light of such a large increase to the current population. It is a game changer, especially as the site would create a bottleneck at the main road exit point to the town. The Planning Inspectorate recently upheld on appeal the decision not to develop a site a very short walking distance away from Skates Lane, citing the DEPZ. A consistency of approach is indicated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Councilor Walks.
Thank you, Chair. So, EPH are being asked this evening to note this report on the local plan update, next steps and spatial strategy. Critical to the whole LPU is the overall housing number for the term of the plan. This paper is completely silent on this. It is expecting EPH to note, which means effectively to endorse, that the total number of homes will be calculated by the standard method, with no reductions. This is not acceptable. The full council voted not to accept this approach, that the number has to be reduced. In addition, the paper proposes a target of 700 homes to be built per annum for the first 5 years, with high numbers in future years to balance what is required. While this may seem attractive at first sight, as 700 per annum is much nearer to the number of new homes we need in the borough, we are actually being sold a pup here. To get us back on track to the correct number of homes per year over the life of the plan, we would need to deliver around 1,000 new homes every year for years 5 to 10. This is simply pushing something we need to deal with today down the track for a different group of councillors, and I dare say a different administration, to deal with. I urge members of this committee to do the responsible thing, remind the Cabinet that they answer to the full council, and to reduce the total housing number for the full period of the plan. Members who know me well have heard me speak many times before on how residents are struggling with the volume of new homes being built around Chinham and the northeast of the borough. Other speakers before me have spoken very well on this topic. Chinham was once a rural ward and is now considered urban Basingstoke, with the ward completely built out. New developments around us into the countryside are relentless. 2,700 new homes have already been built or are being built. The east of Basingstoke development site for 900 houses is in our current local plan, supposed to be started in 2018. Unsurprisingly, 4 years on, there has been precisely no progress made with this site. Developers know this is a very poor site for development and they stay away. The site includes the waste-to-heat plant and our overstretched sewage works, which also takes sewage cake to process from other sewage works. These facilities were located deliberately away from housing as they are unsightly, arguably pollutant, and definitely frequently very smelly. And that's without factoring in all the waste trucks delivering to both of these facilities, which would share the entrance road to the proposed development. 900 new homes, together with the proposed Lodge Farm and Sherfield Hill Farm in this draft spatial strategy, would mean 1,800 more homes accessing the A33, mostly people commuting to Reading, which is already the most economically damaged road that we have in the borough. These developments all take farmland out of production, they damage our already threatened biodiversity, continue to overwhelm our local doctors and dentists and mean even more children being bused to Alton and Newbury for their secondary school education. Any single development of 4,200 homes would have required proper master planning with all the infrastructure factored in, whereas around Chinham, we have developers building this number of homes in a piecemeal way, none taking responsibility for the dire impact it is having on local communities and residents. Members, please recommend that Easter Basingstoke, Lodge Farm and Sherfield Hill Farm are removed from this draft spatial strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Next councillor is Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm probably going to be a bit more controversial this evening. Good evening, councillors. I hadn't initially planned on speaking on this item. However, frustratingly, I spotted a social media post from a committee member asking residents for their opinions whilst failing to give all the facts and felt obliged to come and speak. What I will start with is that I am tired. I'm tired of constantly seeing members of this council and other people pitching communities against each other. Comments such as, "I'm not against house building," that are then followed up, "but we don't need X number of houses in my ward, why not build them south of the M3 or somewhere else in the borough," reek of NIMBYism. The fact of the matter is we need housing here in Basingstoke and Dean. If it isn't these sites, which sites? Nobody's putting forward any alternative. If we had an alternative, we would just pitch another community against another community. Some members may not like to hear this, and I'm sure members who sat on the council when places such as Rooksdown, Hatchwarren, or even Winklebury were built said exactly the same. We have nearly 5,000 people on the housing register. Nobody seems to be thinking of their needs when blocking the local plan or arguing that the standard method is not fair. My only concern is that allowing developers to build so many houses will not solve the problems that many of our residents, especially those in my ward of Winklebury and Manydown, face when trying to get a home. We need to get back to basics and provide truly affordable housing, and bring council housing back into the fold couldn't come soon enough, in my opinion. Moving on, I want to say that I welcome this report from officers and would like to thank them for their timely work on it. Considering the need for an updated plan, it is also welcome that they have gone above the needs of Reg 18 to provide helpful guidance to members. I would like to note that the inclusion of a first draft of an updated infrastructure development plan is a positive step towards ensuring the support of future development with suitable infrastructure. Unfortunately, our borough is currently being held ransom to by many developers due to a lack of a 5-year land supply. And whilst I agree that debate needs to be had over the how, when and what is being built, and also where we build it, it is important that we put any showboating to one side and get this all agreed so that we as a council can be responsible for those decisions rather than being at the behest of the developers. We have shown and continue to show a willingness to consider the impact of building on local residents, and I believe this report is the first step in considering housing numbers in light of the circumstances and shows a proactive approach to addressing concerns. The standard method of calculating homes is clearly not feasible in our borough when we have consistently built more than required. However, at this time we have no other alternative. The current Conservative government, despite all efforts, show no signs of changing it yet. We therefore have to provide a solution to responsibly build homes that many people need, whilst also allowing infrastructure that is desperately needed to catch up. Officers have, from all accounts, diligently tried to establish how we could avoid meeting the standard method, and what is being put forward here tonight seems to mitigate that in some way, whilst not falling foul of the law. Now, after all of that, what is the alternative being put forward by those in opposition to the plan? Reading between the lines, it would seem that some members of the council would like us to break the law by ignoring the standard method. Officers have consulted on this, and this is clearly not a viable option. The plan in this report to introduce a step method at least slows down building so that infrastructure can catch up a little, and it also allows a government with a plan to make relevant changes to the methodology. Again, and reiterating this point, officers have tried to establish any means to not stick to the standard method, and as the report states, and I quote, have concluded that no exceptional circumstances can be or could be identified in the borough, and that to do so, however, in light of the current advice and the national policy framework, is considered too high risk and is unlikely to lead to a sound plan at examination. Members, I urge you to put politicking to one side and get on with this so that our borough's interests can be determined by us and not for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Next speaker is Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much. I don't know what you all think when you look at the site allocation map proposed developments around the borough. Here it is. If you had my ward, you may well have had a nervous breakdown by now. As you can clearly see, the lion's share is, of course, coming to the southwest area. But that's not a surprise, and Councillor Lee will be pleased to know I'm not going to argue with it. First of all, I want to make a positive comment. Oakley has delivered well over double its allocation in the current plan. And in addition to having North Manydown almost up on its border, it's due to have the massive South Manydown creeping up all around the south and the west. I'm very pleased that it is not being given a housing allocation in this revised plan. There's not much more that I can say except that I do feel listened to, having asked for this over a long period of time. So I want to say thank you. It's some compensation for this horrendous map. South Manydown. I need to confer more widely before I give a definitive view of this. I'm encouraged to see that there seems to be some intention to identify a more effective strategic gap than the pathetic one that we've got coming up at the north, which is just about one field. However, I'm not too happy to see that there has been shrinkage since the original vision. Why would you do that? I honestly think Oakley has got enough to contend with without losing a bit of strategic gap, if I'm honest. But as I said, I need to confer with the parish council and with other people before I come back, because it's quite difficult to compare the two maps to see actually what the difference really is. So I would say ditto Dummer, North Waltham and Popham. Yes, Popham is also in my ward, you'll be pleased to know. They all are. I would need to talk to some of the local people who'll know a bit more about me, a bit more about their own area before I come back with a more definitive comment. However, policy SS 3.19, Oakdown Farm, also in my ward. When I read this policy, I had to look twice to believe what I was seeing. Quote, to make provision for the delivery of warehousing. You know, elected members, including MPs, Hampshire councillors, hundreds of residents, have gone through years of blood, sweat and tears to keep warehousing away from this site. It's a key gateway site, and it culminated in getting the developer's appeal dismissed at great cost, despite the recommendation of officers. And I appreciate that the many paragraphs contained in the policy attempt to cover the concerns expressed over a long period of time, but that's simply not good enough. If we accept this policy, we hand free victory to developers who are constrained only by their own profit, not, as we are, by the well-being and good design of the whole area. That's what we're constrained by, and that's what we should stand by. And with the forthcoming new hospital likely to be opposite, we have an opportunity to present what we want for this area of the borough and not what developers want. It's been pointed out by many that Basingstoke does not have an employment need for distribution centres, and the subtext admits that there will be oversupply and we will contribute to the wider regional need. Well, no thank you. I'm elected to represent the needs and well-being of this borough, and this policy does not do that. In fact, it does exactly the opposite. This policy is nothing for me short of outrageous, that we should be considering warehousing when we have fought so long and hard not to get warehousing on that site. And in fact, South Manydown also talks of incorporating land for storage and distribution. how many warehouses do we need in Basingstoke? Actually, we don't need any more, I don't think. That phrase was slipped in at paragraph 5 and it's included in the development principles. All I'm going to say is that there's something going on here. I don't know what it is, but I and many others would like to know what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Next speaker, Councillor Cubitt.
Good evening, Chairman. Just quickly before I start, are members allowed to ask me questions? No, okay. Right, because that's why I brought all this stuff here with. So good evening, members. I request that SS 3.6 and SS 3.7 be removed at this stage for the following reasons, and I believe that there is compelling evidence that they are unsuitable. A number of the issues have already been raised, but I will raise them again. Proximity to the sewage and the incinerator plants. The Environment Agency. The Environment Agency strongly objected to the development of this area in their comments submitted in 2008. Now, facts are facts. The land hasn't changed, the river hasn't changed, the floodplains haven't changed, and the catchment area hasn't changed. So the Environment Agency can't have been correct in 2008, yet diametrically change their position in 2023, when environmental issues are afforded even more importance in 2023, subsequent to the Environment Act and the Environment Improvement Plan 2023 and CARBA. The Environment Agency didn't think that mitigation could work in 2008, and so I really can't understand how we think that mitigations can now. In relation to SS 3.6, which was then known as 121, they stated the river is a priority bat habitat chalk stream near the stretch, and therefore we would object to the development of this area. However, other parts of this site may be suitable, but these constraints mean the site is unlikely to produce the yield expected, and as such should be reconsidered. And of course, originally it was for 900 houses, and that was reduced to 450. There is, and they state that there is a watercourse that runs all the way through the centre of this site. And I'm going to come to the archaeological issues on that site in due course, because there's a Roman road. The Silchester to Chichester road runs right through SS 3.6. And I'm going to come on and talk about the entrenchment at Piatt's Hill as well. In relation to Lodge Farm, which was known as 102, which is now SS 3.7, the Environment Agency in 2008 couldn't have been more explicit. They strongly object to the development of this area. This is their language, and I can show you the evidence, which I have here. It's not me paraphrasing them. As such, we recommend not taking this site forward to the local development framework stage. This site, and this is their words again, falls within the Loddon, Basingstoke to River Lyde confluence, and the Water Framework Directive water body catchment, which is a priority catchment for the Environment Agency based on the ecological evidence for the failure of the water body. A number of significant water management issues have been determined on this water body and a level of risk assigned. Now, on archaeology and heritage, which very few people have made reference to, and I'm seeing I'm running out of time rapidly, basically there was a Southampton archaeology unit and a Dr. Russell in 2019 who, together with the Hampshire County Council in 2017, have determined that the Park Pale, which they believed for the last 60 years was a medieval Basing deer park from the 1300s, is in fact was built for defensive purposes post the Roman period, and the earthwork runs between two river valleys and the ditch lies on the northwest. Anyway, I've got all the details, but basically it says it is considered that this should be of much greater interest in the reinterpretation, and whilst it's already an incredibly important archaeological monument, they believe that the reinterpretation and the link to King Alfred will increase the communal value significantly. The landscape capacity study in 2008 said that this land was low, that was for both. The sequential test could not have been more explicit for the scoring and the obligations under MPPF, we have to allocate land that is not in the sequential test first, and sequential test land must only be allocated in the event that it is proven explicitly that there are no alternatives. And both these sites score the worst on our sequential test. They're 8. And in fact, even on the sequential test that was done for our local plan, it explicitly stated this site is not recommended for allocation given high flood risk implications, biodiversity constraints, and in light of public consultation comments. And especially for the combined site, SS 3.6 and SS 3.7, which were originally called 121 and 102. So in conclusion, the Environment Act, the Environment Improvement Plan of 2023, the more protection that is now afforded to chalk rivers and to catchment areas and to biodiversity, and all of the earlier things that I've raised demonstrate, in my opinion, from Environment Agency and from the government, etc., and the archaeology experts, that these two sites should be removed as there is compelling evidence that they are unsuitable.
Thank you, Annalie. Portfolio holder, would you like to comment on any of the points raised? Or?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes, I will again begin by saying thank you to all of the visiting councillors for your time this evening and for raising these points. Quite a lot of overlap with what members of the public said earlier in terms of geographic locations and in terms of some of the themes and challenges that we face. So we've made a note of all of those. Jenny, thank you for your comments about the housing number. I was just drafting a response when Alex absolutely beat me to it. So I will just say very much in summary to your point, we don't agree with the number that's coming out of the standard method as a cabinet. We don't agree with the number that's coming out of the standard method as a council. But until the government changes the rules, we can't do anything about it. We have to stick to the planning regulations. And we're not going to put forward a local plan update that is going to fall foul of national planning policy. It's a waste of our time, it's a waste of our resources, and it's disingenuous to the public. So we won't be doing that. The method we've proposed is, I believe, is the only solution that we've got if we don't want to build 850 homes a year. We can debate that further, of course, if you want to later on. Alex, thank you for your comments. Wholeheartedly agree with those. And Onley, thank you also for your forensic analysis. I love the fact that you've come in with a huge folder full of information. I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to get properly grilled by the panel and get a chance to leaf through it all. But thank you all again for your time.
Thank you, Andy. Move on to the item. One technical sort of error that happened in your reports, members. The site allocations for the draft plan map was not in there, so you have hard copies on your desk. Way going forward, I'm suggesting we split this into like 5 sections. So the first section will be the proposed stagnation of the housing numbers. That's in the executive summary. So that's in paragraph 2.5 to 2.23, and then we debate the spatial strategy. That's in the executive summary 3.1 to 3.13, but also in the appendix 1. So primarily I would go to appendix 1 and go through the items there. But if members want to go back to the executive summary and make comments, that's fine. The same approach will be on the draft housing allocations. So again, in the executive summary, 3.14 to 3.26. Again, that primarily is going to be in the appendix 2. Again, you can make references to the executive summary. Also, approach to rural areas, that's in the appendix 2 and paragraph 3.27 to 3.3 in the executive summary. And the last one would be the infrastructure delivery plan and the timetable. So I want to split that out to questions to officers and debate. So the first section I'd like to start with is the housing numbers on the executive summary from 2.5 to 2.23. I don't know if anyone members want to kick off on the Cabinet's proposal to have a lower number at the beginning of the plan. I know the councillors have already mentioned that in speakers if far away. Councillor Ashfield?
Yeah, I suppose a question I've got on the stepped approach is how do we think the planning inspectorate would view that if an appeal were to come forward during that 5-year period and we were outside of our 5-year land supply?
Joe, sorry.
If the inspector accepted the stepped approach and it was in the adopted plan, that would then be our housing requirement that we would look at when we're considering planning applications and appeals, so that would be taken as an accepted position.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. Joe, can you just give us some idea, if we were to adopt this today, where would we stand on our housing land supply? Obviously, I'm on DC, so we get planning by appeal quite often. Can you give us a time scale of when we might be out of that world of not producing a 5-year housing land supply?
When we're at examination, we will have to prove that we've got a 5-year land supply at that point, otherwise the plan won't be found sound. So one of the main reasons for having a plan in place and going through that process and having a sound plan will show that at that point we will have a land supply, so it will be restored. At the moment we're looking at adoption in 2025, so we're looking at sort of 2 years' time.
Portfolio holder, Andy, sorry.
Can I just intervene very quickly? I'm obviously not a planning expert, and if I've got this wrong, Joe, please do tell me. But my understanding is that according to the draft MPPF, which was published earlier on this year, the proposals there, as they currently stand, are that if we go to Reg 18, the 5-year land supply requirement threshold drops to 4 years land supply. So potentially, if we get this out there quickly enough, that's what we're all trying to do. I think we're all agreed we want to do this as quickly as possible. Assuming that version of the MPPF makes it into the final levering up bill and becomes law, then as things stand with our 4.2, we would be okay and that tilted balance would disappear. But that is obviously subject to change.
As a portfolio holder, and obviously through Joe, perhaps you can give us a sliding scale of where you think we will be, because obviously the economic environment as we stand, production of homes is reducing. The ability of many people to purchase their homes is reducing. Interest rates are rising, and therefore that is not great. And developers are not likely to develop where they see no opportunity to sell those homes. So, I mean, there are boroughs whose housing land supply is at 2 years. Now, the reality of us getting there means that through the examination period, we are likely to be up against a firing squad for developers, because they'll just keep saying the tilted balance is in our favour. You can't prove it. So have you got projections to where we're going to be?
I'm not quite sure what you mean in terms of projections and things. I mean, we update the trajectory every year anyway, so we know generally where we are with things and what we need to do. And that is a reason to move quickly with the plan, to get these sites in, to make sure that we have got that land supply position. So that's kind of the reason for doing it. In terms of what Councillor Konechko said, I mean, we're just going to have to wait and see in terms of the new evidence and what comes through from government. But hopefully we will have enough quite quickly once that comes in, if we get to Reg 18.
Just in the last 6 months, we've reduced from 4.8% to years to 4.2. Another reduction on that scale will get us below 4, and we'll really be in trouble. So I'm just making the point that our discussions tonight are so vital that we deliver a local plan update, but also that we are mindful that if we don't get there, we will still be under attack throughout the examination period.
Thank you. Abdul, did you?
Thank you, Chair. Just in reflection to what we've seen today from residents,
raising many concerns. I'm not going to talk about them. And I think we've seen people outside sending a very strong message about they clearly want to be part of this conversation, which is a positive thing. Just trying to think of a way to balance things, because we want to listen to the residents, but at the same time we also are obliged with the national framework and modelling. And I was kind of trying to look at the pragmatic side of things and look at the legal advice and the housing modelling. There was two options that was put forward, and it says this one or that one. I just wonder why not a combination of both. If we look at the delay of updating the plan, that we have up until mid-2024. That would be 5 years from last time it was updated. If we've delayed that, that will buy us time to take into consideration all the issues that has been raised today in relation to having experts from biodiversity to look into the sites that was put forward, as well as experts in archaeology, and perhaps even looking into identifying other potential sites if some of those sites are not fit to or will impact residents and biodiversity or the character of the borough. So and also that will feed and help with the second option that talk about if there is a strong evidence, we can argue about the numbers, and that basically a good exercise for us to see whether actually the sites available here are not gonna, we don't have enough sites or sufficient sites that would be enable us to meet the target. So I don't know whether, my question here is whether you've considered a combination of those two options, and also in relation to that, what is as we speak today, what's your timeline as in getting that strategy updated? Were you considering mid-2024 or were you considering earlier? Thank you.
Just in terms of the timeline, there's a timetable included in the report. So that's in section 5.1, which sets out the future timetable for it. The local plan process is quite a long one. It always takes a number of years. So we're looking to move quite quickly to get that adopted in 2 years' time. If we did delay further in terms of waiting for the statistics to come out, as it said there in the legal advice, we're not really going to get the information we need, potentially in terms of household projections, until 2024. There's a government deadline in place that you need to move forward and submit your plan by June 2025. If you don't do that, you can't take your plan forward under the current system. It will be under the new system, and we don't quite know what that means yet. But it might, for example, mean that we have national planning policies rather than local planning policies. That's what national government is looking at. So those are all the things that we need to take into account, and the timetable that we've got here would enable us to submit within that time scale so that we can do it under the existing plan system. So that's a main reason for doing it. In terms of the constraints, that's also kind of addressed under section 2.14 onwards. So we did look at that in addition to the legal advice and went through all of the constraints. This committee and others have raised a vast number of individual and cumulative impacts that we've looked at. And that work has basically concluded that none of those, while they will influence the spatial strategy and where development should go, they are not in themselves a reason, it doesn't give us the circumstances, exceptional reasons to not go with the standard method.
Did you want to come back or? Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So just what I'm getting here, so if we haven't submitted on time, then, and it goes into 2025, we will end up with a new model that we're not necessarily are aware of how it's going to work. So it could be better or it could be worse, right? But for me, is we're going here a bit of, it's quite a blind decision to go with what we know about, what we're aware about, because we don't know what the future would unfold. And then again, that just, for me, that urges us to actually delay and look into this properly and buy us time, not to rush. I know there is a need for housing, and I do support that, but at the same time, that needs to be done responsibly and without impacting the existing residents. Once again, I refer to the how this could impact the quality of life of residents. People are coming out there. It extremely expressing their concerns. And if we want to do that properly and want to make sure residents are the centre of what we're doing, then that's where we've got to listen to them. That's where we can look into other options and not rushing into updating the plan. So, so it's kind of done and dusted. That's just my point around overall approach to the plan. Thank you.
Folio Holder, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. It's an absolutely valid point. We do need to consult with the public, and the conversations we've had this evening absolutely demonstrate that. What I would say is that that's exactly what Regulation 18 is all about. It's a Regulation 18 consultation. So this will go before the public. Well, we're going to start having conversations with town and parish councils within the next few weeks. We're meeting with the local MP on her public forum later on this month. And then we'll go to full public consultation as soon as we can, which realistically means at the start of 2024. So we want to consult, we want to get the public out there and involved in this process, as they have been over the last few years. But the risk of us potentially losing our ability to set our own policies, I think is too great for us to delay it any further. And as others, such as Kenneth said this evening, we need to get this 5-year housing land supply or potentially 4-year housing land supply sorted as quickly as possible, so we're back in control of our own planning regime.
Thank you. John, I believe you had your hand up.
Thanks, Gary. Yes. I just like to understand better how we've got to where we've got to, because this is a fundamental change from what all councillors agreed that in response to the public concern about the amount of housing that's being built in the borough, that we wanted to reduce the number of houses. And now we have a situation where we are proceeding on the basis that we are accepting the standard methodology. So I've got sort of two questions really. Is firstly, what are other borough councils doing? Are they also grasping the nettle, as you would have it, or are they saying that things change? Government may come forward with different refinements on their policies or different interpretations or better clarification, which might help us. That's the first question. And the second question is, we've obviously taken senior legal advice in order to get to where we got to with these papers. But what sort of legal advice have we had on the staggered approach to delivery, and the chances, the likelihood that an examiner will accept it? Because we seem to be betting the house on this, and if that backfires, then it could have quite serious consequences and throw the whole planning process into some disarray.
I was just going to say, in terms of kind of what's changed since we paused, I mean, one of the reasons for pausing last year was to do the additional work and to get the legal advice and look at the constraints. So that work has all now been completed, and the housing modelling and things. So that's what we've looked at, and that's what's changed in the way that we've done all that work, and now we've come to the conclusion that we have. So that's how we've moved on. In terms of what other authorities are doing, it's difficult for me to say what every authority is doing because they're all in different positions. There are a large number who are proceeding, and they're proceeding with the standard method. There were quite a number of authorities who are also pausing. I'm not sure at the moment whether they're going to continue to pause or move forward. I mean, that's a decision-making process they're all going through, because there are quite a large number of those, and they're in different positions. There are other authorities that have adopted the stepped approach. Fareham was one that was actually found sound just this year, in April this year. So it is an approach that is accepted by inspectors, and it is a way of moving forward. So that's kind of where other authorities are. In terms of legal advice, we haven't got legal advice as yet on the stepped approach, but that is something that we will do as we move forward, and we will consider that in more detail. The fact that the plan is still meeting the standard method in terms of 850 a year currently, that helps very much in terms of meeting sort of the legal tests and soundness. That will be sort of the key test. As I said, the stepped approach is quite an accepted approach with a number of found sound plans across the country.
Want to come back, John?
Yeah, I think some cases, a stepped approach has been accepted, but in others it's not been. I suppose I'm somewhat surprised that we haven't taken legal advice on the stepped approach, given that this is the whole thrust of the proposals that are being put forward to us this evening. Can I ask another question? Could I have some clarification on what the total number of houses under the standard methodology would be if we weren't doing a stepped approach? Because there is reference to 700 for the next 5 years, but it's not clear to me what we think if we were applying the standard methodology cold, as it were, whether it's currently 850, what would it be?
There's always a number of ifs with the standard method because, as you know, it changes a couple of times a year. So it does depend. It also depends what our plan period ultimately is. So those are kind of things that could change. But if you take the basic approach of 850, which is what it is now, if that was to continue over the plan period of 18 years, because you have to have 15 years post-adoption, that would give you a figure of 15,300. So if you're looking at a figure around just below 700, the figure after the 5-year period would be a figure of around 955 if that was applied for the rest of the plan period, which was similar to what Councillor Fox said, but slightly lower.
Thank you. Sam, you were next year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, that's quite loud. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to just clarify one point. So we're right to say that if we follow the stepped approach, we won't actually reduce the overall quantum of housing delivered over a 15-year period. So actually what's being proposed here is not actually a reduction in housing pressure. It's just a bit of statistical wizardry. I think that's probably worth confirming. I think the main question I have is about delivery. So we're proposing a step method where we aggressively step up the number of homes in the latter 10 years. But I was looking through the report and it seems to me that there's a bit of a vacuum when it comes to delivery. Actually on page 82, where we are expecting to see updated housing trajectory, all we see is a gap, updated in due course. So I'm sort of surprised that the administration has brought this paper to committee now, and they're asking us to review and scrutinise their housing plans when that gap is there, when that delivery gap is there. And I'd like clarification, please, from officers or the portfolio holder about what tests have been undertaken, about how realistic it will be to deliver in those 10 years an accelerated delivery of 950 homes per year. I mean, how is that going to be delivered? What phasing are we looking at? There seems to be a big gap in the report where there's no discussion of how this will be delivered and what the phasing will look like.
I think I'll take that question because it's obviously politically loaded. The wizardry comment is not fair. We've been quite clear at the start that this is about slowing down house buildings. It's about shifting it from the first 5 years into the next 10. We've not claimed to reduce the number of houses. We've claimed to slow them down to give infrastructure a chance to catch up. And we've been absolutely transparent. Joe's just told you what the numbers are. So I do refute the claim of wizardry there. It's about slowing it down because the overall housing number is determined by the standard method. We can't change that. We've tried to change it. The previous administration has asked the government to change it. We've written to Michael Gove since we got into power in May. He's refused to meet with us to discuss this any further. So we are where we are with the standard method. The overall quantum needs to remain the same. We can't change it, otherwise we'll be in breach of planning policy. The slight bit of wiggle room that we have is to look at the momentum of it, to look at the timing, the phasing of it, and that's what we've done. Because as many of the speakers have said tonight, the infrastructure that we have is not good enough at the moment, and we need to give that an opportunity to catch up. In terms of the gaps, I don't recognise those. The work that's been going on behind the scenes with officers shows how the delivery would work throughout the life of the plan. So that's there, and the work has been done. If there are sections in the report that haven't been finalised yet, we will obviously go through them and make sure that they are tightened up and ready to go in time for Regulation 18. And I think, as I've said before, and as I've seen on the Conservative Party's social media accounts, we all want this to go as quickly as possible. So that's why we've done this today. That's why we've done this tonight, because we all want to move ahead as rapidly as we can and make sure that we get this local plan process back on track.
Thank you. We'll come back, yeah.
Just a very brief response. I think what residents of Basingstoke need, especially when we have public forums like this, is not to be presented with reports with clear gaps on questions of delivery and trajectory. So I think what we need is clear clarification of that behind the scenes work that you describe, of how many homes are going to be delivered each year, and we need to have an assessment, a matrix of which sites will achieve that and how achievable they are. I think if we're to agree or note this report, we need to have that clear justification of the approach, how each site will be delivered, when they'll be delivered. That's the missing piece here.
Thank you. Yeah, point noted. Portfolio holder. Yep. David, do you want to fire?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Andy and Joe, for your walkthrough of the report. I take issue, though, with your politicisation of the standard method. And on page 4, we talk about the government continues to reiterate its commitment to the standard methodology. The government doesn't. I've got in my hand here a letter from Michael Gove, 5th December, from the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, sent to all MPs. Plan-making process for housing has to start with a number. This number should, however, be an advisory starting point, a guide that is not mandatory. Then a week later in Parliament, the Housing Minister at the time, Lucy Fraser, said, this is on Hansard, you can go and check it yourself, public record. In setting the principles for a local plan, we intend to retain a method for calculating local housing need figures, but these will be an advisory starting point. We propose that it will be up to local authorities, that's us, working with our communities to determine how many homes can actually be built. I'm quite happy to read that again if you want, or else I'll just send it, we can put it into the minutes. It's interesting, Andy, because you talked earlier on about the fact that, oh, don't worry, because the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is going to remove the need for a 5-year supply of housing sites, but it's not written into it's not written in yet. But don't worry, we should hopefully be able to rely on that. But yet, what's happening with the changes that the government are talking to around about calculating housing need, we're not relying on that. So you can't have your cake and eat it, I'm afraid. To move on to this, so one of the visiting councillors mentioned the social media post. That was me. I was accused of being a NIMBY, quite interesting, and pitting communities against each other, apparently. My Facebook post is on my Facebook page. You can have a look, you see for it. What I actually said is that in October 2022, Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council councillors voted unanimously to reject the proposed housing number figure of 15,000. However, this new administration aren't listening and are continuing regardless of that number. However, I can't accuse them of not listening and do the same myself. And I then asked a lot of questions of my residents. What's your opinion? Are we building too much? Are we not building enough affordable homes? Should we have more social housing? Should we prioritise bungalows? Should we build more homes and flats in the centre of Basingstoke rather than continue to encroach towards rural villages? Should we start looking more towards south of the M3? what do you think? And I finished that by saying, I'm here to represent you, so I want to know your thoughts. Please feel free to email me in confidence if you need, don't do this publicly. Now, that's not NIMBYism. That is engaging with my residents. The people who voted for me, that's listening to them. That's not coming here and putting my opinion in front of this EPH committee. That is trying to put my residents' opinions in front of that. And I got some very good feedback across the spectrums. Even though I'm a Conservative, I'm not their Conservative councillor. I'm the councillor for Sherburn, St John and Rixdale. There's no politics involved when it comes to speaking to my residents and sitting here for my residents. So there was absolutely there was a case for more affordable housing. There was a case for more social housing. People were complaining about the prices of housing being too much. However, the continual message that I was receiving was, we're building too much and we're building too fast. The housing number is too high. This council voted back in October. I voted against my own administration to pause the local plan process and to reject the number. And I still don't think we've done that work efficiently at the stage that we're at. So I'm not happy with the number. That's my comment on that. It's not political. If it was a Conservative administration sat in there, I would still be sat here saying the same thing. I met some quite lovely residents from Basing, Lichpet, Chinham, who were outside, and to get that engagement with a council meeting just shows you the power, the emotion that's involved there. We can still do a lot more. It's not NIMBYism to want to protect our green fields and our rural heritage. The census figures from the last decade show that Basingstoke and Dean delivered 10% growth, just shy of 10% growth. National average is just over 6%. We've delivered almost twice the amount of housing that the rest of the country has done. Now, obviously, that's also weighted as well because the rest of the southeast builds a lot of housing. Please don't kid residents, okay? This isn't going to be the nasty Tories with their planning straitjacket are forcing us to build houses, okay? Fortune favours the bold. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is going through Parliament right now. You had a very esteemed gentleman, town planner, that came in and sat and told you about the Housing Committee's opinion on the standard method and how it's changing. That is Parliament's version of us. That are people feeding back to the Housing Minister on what needs to change. Okay, so let's not kid residents.
Can we sum up now, please?
Sorry, yeah. Let's not kid residents. Let's not pretend that this housing number has been imposed on us. We can fight this number if we want to.
I don't want to get into a political dogfight here, but I mean, yeah, it wasn't really a question there, but he's responding to a councillor who spoke at the beginning, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. I also read Michael Gove's letter, but I then also read the advice that we had from two KCs who looked at the detail behind Michael Gove's letter and tell us that the standard method remains the default for us and for other local authorities unless they can demonstrate exceptional circumstances. We've written to Michael Gove to try and get clarity on that. We've asked for a meeting with him. He's refused to do that. You mentioned in your post that this administration is not listening. At the risk of being political, it's not this administration that's not listening, it's the government that's not listening. We want to look again at the housing number. We're not able to. If that situation changes with the Levelling Up Bill, we will look again and see what implications that has for this borough. But until we get some clear guidance from government, we've got to do what the rules tell us to right now, which is to use the standard method. I'll leave it there.
Be quick, you have about 5 minutes then.
No, this is a follow-up, but quick, and it's a question. So if those changes come out in the Levelling Up Regeneration Bill, are we hamstringing us? What happens if we run the models? What happens if the Whitchurch Town Council run the models in Chelmer? What are we doing? What are we locking ourselves into here at this stage right now?
I mean, as I've said a number of times at these committees, that's always an iterative process. We're not locking ourselves into anything. We're just moving forward with the conversation. I think the report is quite clear that if things change, we will look to change with them. And we've already said that we've got consultants lined up to relook at the figures as soon as they come out, so that we will be ready if national guidance does change, that we'll know what the position is and therefore how we should move forward.
Sorry, if I can add very briefly, Chair, and also as well, as far as the KC advice is concerned as well, once that changes, once the levelling up bill actually makes it through and gets onto the statute books, then we've got our KCs lined up to look at that again, and if that situation changes, obviously we'll take it into account.
Thank you. Chloe,
It was kind of related, and I appreciate the timetable. I think it'd be useful for me, perhaps other newer councillors that weren't through the last local plan update, but to understand what happens between Reg 18 and Reg 19. If after the plan has gone out to regulation, if government legislation changes, legal opinion changes, we get this memorandum of understanding with water companies, or indeed a wonderful brownfield site magically appears, do we have to go back out to consultation, or do we take those changes and put them into Reg 19? At what point does it change materially that we have to go back again on consultation?
So as we go through the process, the plan will always need to be up to date, so we'll always reflect whatever the current position is, and in terms of national guidance, for example. So after Reg 18 happens, we will obviously have a large number of comments that come in. We will have a look at those, respond to those, and update the plan accordingly and take that into account. We will also, through that sort of time period between Reg 18 and 19, take into account anything that happens nationally. As you suggested, if any other sites come in, we can have a look at that. It will then be a decision for the council. You can theoretically go back and do Reg 18 again, if you feel that that's necessary, because your plan is so different, you can theoretically do it. Or you can move forward with a different Reg 19, which is quite different from the Reg 18. So the regs are quite flexible in that way, but once you get to Reg 19, that's your submitted plan to the inspectorate. So you need to be happy at that point when you actually submit.
thank you, Joe, for that. Sean?
It's obvious that, in my view, that this plan doesn't echo the wishes of our residents, given the number of people that turned up tonight. And in fact, it doesn't represent the council, who passed a motion to reject the number given. We've had decades of overbuilding, and we need to slow down the housing being built to allow our NHS and all our services to catch up. So what we need is an overall number that reflects what our community needs. Residents in Kempshott and Buckskin are telling me on the doorstep that they're sick and tired of it. They've had enough of house building and proposed warehouses, putting further stresses on our local services and stresses on infrastructure, and we need to protect our rivers as well. So I feel that the new administration is ignoring the government's clear position that historic over-delivery of house building can be recognised and taken into account, and thereby lowering the overall number of houses required. So importantly, what we need to do is that the overall number of houses proposed needs to be reduced, not just the first few years, which I suppose in my mind is sort of like a sticking plaster approach, where the wound will be opened up in years down the line.
Thank you. I don't know whether you wanted to come back. I think you've probably touched on that once before, isn't it? You know.
I have. All that we'll say is I agree with the vast majority of that analysis, Sean, and please pass that on to Maria Miller and ask her to lobby Michael Gove along those sorts of lines. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken?
Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence. Obviously got a number of questions tonight. Firstly, Andy, you've promised that infrastructure will be improved during the 5-year period. So can I have your commitment that we'll see a sewage upgrade, an electricity capacity upgrade, or a road improvements? Because without you doing that, actually you're selling us a pup. And frankly, it's just a delay for a number into the future. So can you tell me what your infrastructure upgrades are going to be?
As a former council leader, Ken, you know exactly how much influence we have as a local authority and what we can and can't do. If this administration had the power to build new schools, to upgrade roads, to build new sewage treatment works, then we will give it serious consideration. But as you well know, we're reliant on third parties such as Hampshire County Council and the water companies to deliver that. One of the speakers spoke about their lack of confidence in the ability of water companies to deliver. I think probably most of us around this table would share that lack of confidence. What that additional time buys us and what the policies that we're strengthening elsewhere within the broader local plan allow us to do is to be tougher. So we are developing memoranda of understanding with water companies. We are talking to the Environment Agency. We are strengthening our policies around climate change. And we're talking to Hampshire County Council about infrastructure provisions as well, about road and transport. So the additional time increased our chances of being able to deliver that, and that's exactly why we're pushing ahead with that.
So I take it from that, Andy, you can't promise us anything substantial at this time. You're just going to see how it goes. I mean, I accept that your best intentions are there, but the reality is a number of people who spoke tonight have highlighted issues that they feel additional development will impact on the services and the infrastructure that they will get. So where do you see yourselves? Do you see us as a council financing some of that? I just want to get some promise out of you of where we might be.
I promise to make the local plans as tough as it can be to make sure that we get the delivery that we need. That's what I'll commit to quite happily, and we'll do absolutely everything we can, Ken.
Thank you, Andy. Ken.
It's just easier. It's just easier having written them down. No. Obviously, we're going to have a reduction of 150 houses through the first 5 years. That means that, and in support of Councillor Alex Lee's point, that means that 60 families every year are not going to get off our social housing list. Now, how are you going to convey that to them going forward? Because although it's the right policy for some people, and I accept that, it isn't the right policy for everybody. So you need to be aware of the 5,000 people on our housing list whose hopes, aspirations will be dashed by the delivery over a stepped period.
When I took on this role, I was told it was a poison chalice, and the last few minutes have just confirmed that. On the one hand, I've got people saying we need to build more houses. On the other hand, I've got people telling me we need to build fewer houses, and that's what the public wants. The reality is that we are balancing the needs of residents as best we can, given the constraints and the very real constraints that we face. And I think we've made those clear this evening, whether you agree or disagree with them. But there's an important stream of work that's happening in parallel, which I think councillors will probably be aware of. And that's earlier on this year, a motion that was passed proposed by my colleague there, Joe Slimin, tasked the administration at the time, and something we've inherited with pleasure, tasked the administration for looking at the process of restarting council house building effectively, so the building of more social housing within this borough. We've been working with officers on that since we came into power in May, and we hope to make further announcements over the coming weeks and months, and I hope that will help allay some of your concerns, Ken, and some of the concerns that the residents face, because they are, joking aside, the issue about the start, that you raise an absolutely valid point, and it's something Councillor Lee mentioned earlier, that we do have a long housing register, and we've got a long waiting list. That's unacceptable, and we need to do more as a local authority to put that right.
Thank you, Andy. Joe, did you want to say anything, or you happy? I thought I saw your hand up, Joe Slimin. Yep.
Thank you. In fact, I was going to mention council housing. What a surprise. You talk about deliverability. Obviously, if we are in control of land and we are the council deliverers, whether we're going to deliver it directly or indirectly, who knows, at least we have control over the type of houses that are built. because those 700 houses that are currently planned are not all going to be social housing. In fact, they're probably more likely going to be 4 and 5 bedroom houses that people in this borough can't afford, that people across the country can't afford now because somebody has ruined the economy and the mortgage rates have gone sky high. So we have got to now bite the bullet and go back to the days when people couldn't afford to buy a house. They still might be able to buy a council house in the future because the rules don't apply. So Margaret Thatcher's vision of house owners are still alive and well. But unfortunately, what we didn't do when we sold our council houses is look to provide more social housing for people that need it, because everybody thought that the poison chalice was to get their own house and not to have to go to a council house or social housing. We have to change our views, because it's going to have to be that people have to afford what they can live in. They need to have sustainable homes. We need to build them in the right place. We need to not destroy our countryside in the process. It may be that our 4,500 people on the waiting list in December, most of those wanted 1-bedroom properties, flats. We're talking about developing in the centre of town. Maybe that is the way forward. A lot of other organisations do that. I'm not talking about 47 blocks of high-rise buildings, but we need to think about what types of houses we're building. And I think that we can say that if we have a deliverable 700 houses, and a lot of those could be delivered by us, they are the ones that are going to hit the target of getting the housing need down for those people, as well as providing homes for those people who do want to afford. And not only that, there are a lot of older people who are living in very large houses on their own, and there aren't enough bungalows for them to sell, to downsize into. McCarthy and Stone in Tadley are building some really nice flats. They got permission, having gone to appeal. Unfortunately, most people in Tadley who've got a 3-bedroom house can't afford a 1-bedroom flat, so they're not going to be able to afford those. So we need to get the right types of houses in the right place, and obviously we need to deliver them as quickly as we can. I will be talking later about a particular site, as I'm sure you will be aware. And obviously most of us have experienced local plans in the past and where things shouldn't be. It isn't a case of NIMBYism in this case for many of the people who are talking about the site. They are talking about genuine reasons why things in that particular site shouldn't be. And this 700 will help us reduce the numbers that we can currently look at. Okay, sites may come forward, other sites may come forward. When the people who build these houses, who've got all the money, suddenly decide that people are going to buy them, they'll probably come forward with lots of other places they might want to do. Why aren't they delivering the ones, how many is it, 7,000 houses we've actually given planning permission to? They're not being built. I wonder why. Because nobody can buy them and they're not going to risk their money, because they'd rather keep the money in their pocket. So I think that, my question is, council houses must be part of the equation. We must move forward as soon as possible with our decisions, and obviously that can help us take control of delivering the sites so that we can actually deliver it, and we can guarantee that we deliver it, because when we're in charge, we can guarantee anything.
Thank you, Jo. I know there's a paper coming forward. I can't remember to what committee, what we're going to do. CEP, no, I don't think it's on the agenda for this one, but various options have been adopted around the country, and what we can do as landowners. Yeah, I want to move on. Thank you. I think there's concern over the housing numbers, the administration's approach to reducing the numbers in the first 5 years. I mean, that's been logged. I'm sure, Andy's, you've got full scope of where the committee is coming from. I'd like to move on to spatial strategy. I'd like to look at sort of SS1, the new policy, and the text behind that. If any members has got that, that's on page 39 of Appendix 1. If everybody's happy with that new text, I can move on to the next one. I take that's a yes. So then we go on to page 41, proposed new settlement boundaries. So we have Bishop's Green, page 44. Etchenswell, page 47. '51 Headley. 54 Highclere. Sorry, carry on.
Gary, sorry, I'm electronic.
Sure.
I'm trying to save the world here. So I'm going,
tried that.
Yeah, I'm going off the appendix. Could I trouble you, Chair, just to go back to SS1 spatial strategy, because I do have a question on it, if that's okay. Yeah, it's points on just above the clean policy, where it talks about the housing number. I'm not going to go into that, but the last sentence is, this is explained in greater detail in appendix, and obviously that's blank. I'd just like to know what that document's going to be, because that's the exceptional circumstances, and when this committee will get a copy of them.
So these policies are sort of the old copies of the old versions that came in June last year. So they will obviously all need to be updated in light of the discussions tonight and such like, and they don't reflect stepped approach or anything like that, for example. So that will all need to be moved forward. When we go out for consultation at Reg 18, we will produce more material and paper to explain the position that Councillor Carr talked about in terms of kind of phasing and delivery rates and things like that. So that will all be published in due course. Some of that will be in the appendix, some won't. So that's just shows you there'll be more information, basically.
Come back.
Just to come back on that, is any of this going to change with a stepped approach? I got a little bit concerned there when I heard you say there's stuff not in this.
All of the appendices that we brought back, Appendix 1 and 2, are the papers that came back to June. So that was the position, and they've not been updated. So yes, these will change. This offers this committee an opportunity to talk about things that we didn't talk about last June and the time before that. So it doesn't reflect the stepped approach currently. It will do if we decide to move forward with that, because obviously it will need to. There are other things that will change. It's the plan period here only goes up to 2039, that'll be 2040, so there will be changes, to reflect whatever approach the administration chooses to go with.
Okay, and will we be bringing that back to EPH? Because there's a number of things. The Memorandum of Understanding with water companies is an example I'd quite like to bring back to EPH for us to discuss. I think that's the right committee.
Well, I think it's going to Cabinet. I'll make Andy explain, sorry.
Very happy for it to go to EPH, but it won't happen this side of Regulation 18 because we need to get cracking with it. But I take your point. Yes, things like the Memorandum of Understanding, that realistically they're not going to be ready this side of Regulation 18 anyway, but when they are ready post the actual Regulation 18, I would suspect, I'm looking at planning officers who have been through this process before, that once the comments from Regulation 18 are taken into account, the policies will come back to EPH for further scrutiny. Yes. And just one other point I could make. Sorry, Councillor Kai, I think I misunderstood your question a little bit earlier on, which is around those, you were referring to the asterisks here on this page 39, is that right, for the missing numbers?
That's one of the gaps in your material, but the one I was referring to was on page 82, the missing trajectory.
Yeah. So in terms of the gaps here, just so the committee is clear, as Joe said, the actual total, refers to the total number of new homes in the plan period, and that's determined by the years of the plan, and it's determined by the changes in the calculation of the standard method. So those asterisks are there because they will need to be, the number will need to be put in nearer the time, but at the moment, as Joe indicated, that number is 15,300. So that will be the number that will currently sit in that box if we were to go live today.
Thank you. Ken, we still on the SS1?
Well, we are. It's the point about Headley, if I may. We are.
Well, that's not SS1, is it? That's new settlement boundaries.
Yes, it is. Sorry, I thought we were on this.
Oh, well, we can go. If nobody else wants to talk about SS1,
No,
we can go on to the new
sorry.
settlement policy boundaries.
Yeah,
Headley,
it's page 51 and obviously 52 and 53. Already we've approved PIPs on Galley Lane already, and therefore it's going to be likely to be a creeping development up towards the A339. Obviously, delighted that we do have a new settlement boundary, but the parish is very large, and as Councillor Morrow rightly pointed out, we've got 2 appeals in Ashford Hill. I'm slightly disturbed that we haven't got a new settlement boundary for there, because that would have been a protector against those 2 appeals, which are unwanted and unwarranted in terms of the capacity of the village to take them. So can I just have a comment on that?
Yes, so the settlement policy boundaries set out in the document here is where we're proposing to establish new settlement policy boundaries through the local plan update process. So as you're aware, there isn't currently a settlement policy boundary around Headley, but the settlement study identifies that it is a suitably sustainable settlement to have a settlement policy boundary, and it identifies this as based upon the work we had done in 2022 and the consultees we've spoken to. This was an appropriate boundary for that. And throughout the plan process, we can look to review the boundaries to ensure that at the point of adoption, they are the most appropriate boundaries. In terms of the settlements with existing policy boundaries, so that is like Ashford Hill, the intention is that we should, where we can, encourage local communities to review those boundaries themselves through the neighbourhood planning process going forward. So that allows a proper localism approach to that issue.
Just so as you're aware, Ashford Hill and Headley Parish actually delivered a neighbourhood plan. Obviously, it wasn't a protector because it didn't have a site of 10, but it did reiterate the settlement boundaries, and yet we've still got appeals coming through on things that were outside that original settlement. So is there anything in these formulated documents that will give any hope to residents who are going to appeal or will be at the appeal to oppose the new developments?
Well, I think what you're saying is the lack of effectiveness of the SPB is a consequence of not having the 5-year housing land supply at the moment. Clearly, as we discussed already, when the plan's adopted, the council will have a 5-year housing land supply, and so the establishment of these boundaries will then reinstate an understanding of what is settlement and what is countryside.
Thank you. Is there any more on the settlement boundaries for those rural areas? So I'd like to go on to SS3, site allocations for residential mix and use development on page 29, and it lists the number of houses for those particular sites. If any comments want to be on that, on the clean policy and the text surrounding that, or want to go more into the substantial issues when they get to the areas? Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. If I may take us back to page 26, if I could. We have got a number for Kingsclere at 175. How do we take account of the 50 that weren't delivered in the previous neighbourhood plan? And will they be added to this? Are we looking at now 225? What is the? I mean, people are just need an understanding of what's going to come forward.
So the 50 that you're talking about in Kingsclere, they count as a committed development already because they're within a neighbourhood plan. So the 175 kind of takes that into account as if they're coming forward. That will continue to be monitored every year. So if they don't come forward, that number would have to be re-provided. So that would be on top of the number that you've got here. I mean, this is a point that's been raised. I think it's a valid one. And I think in the new version of any policy, we need to make that clear that anything would need to be re-provided if things weren't being delivered. So what we do now and what we will continue to do is provide a statement to every settlement, every parish, every year through the annual monitoring, because this gets updated through the annual monitoring process every year, so they will be able to see exactly what the situation is and what they need to be providing.
So back to page 29 of 80, SS3. Is there any comments on the clean policy and the text? No? Should we move on to draft policies on North Manydown? Any comments on that? On page 67 or 33 of 80? No? Oh, Sean?
It's just one quick query. I was always led to believe it was about 3,500 from North Manydown. It seems to have gone up to 4,000.
Part of the Manydown land you'll know benefits from outline permission, which is about 3,500. There's part of the allocation which aren't included within that outline permission, which account for about another 500 units. So that's the reason. Yeah, Worton Park, and also the land that's known as Parcel 6, which lies just to the south of the area. It's got outline permission.
SS 3.2 Basingstoke Golf Club. That's well under the way. Next one, SS 3.33 Hanson Fields. That's also substantially moving forward. Next one, SS 3-10 North Manydown. Oh, go on there again. These are the clean policies, aren't they? Sorry. Is there any comments on those particular 3 sites?
Just to go back to the clean policies, where do we put the appeals that are currently going through? There are a number of appeals that are larger sites. Where do we put them within the numbering?
So any site that gets permission, say, as a windfall, so that's not already allocated, it will be included in the figures and the land supply figures. These are particular allocations moving forward. The reason why we're carrying forward these 3 particular allocations is because they're the largest ones, they're the ones that will take longer to come forward, and they will basically continue to provide houses in the new plan period. So that's why it's to ensure that if things happen, for example, a new developer came on board or whatever happened, that there's still a policy framework and that just doesn't disappear completely for these sites.
Thank you, Joe. Moving on to clean policy on ensuring a supply of deliverable sites, page 49 of 80. No comments? Then we get on to SS5 neighbourhood planning. Oh, sorry, David. You'll catch up, yeah.
Sorry, Chair. Policy SS4. So again, we've got, in principle, development will come forward in accordance with the phasing set out in what policies. First question. In fact, I have 2 questions, so I'll let Joe answer that. When will we see these policies? What policies are they referring to in that?
The reason why it's got X's is just because we don't have the numbers, because we knew that all the numbers and things were going to be updated. So again, this just reflects the fact that this is the position as of last June.
Yeah, but what policies get produced once we have the numbers? It's referring to something.
It's referring to the site policies.
And do we not have those sites listed in our spatial?
Yeah, they're the sites that are listed here. It's just that the numbers, as some have already clocked, that the numbers keep changing. So they are different numbers even within the report for the different sites. So this is just purely kind of that for us, we will have an updated version.
Second question, now completely different. Second part of the policy, it talks about taking account of water quality matters in line with policy AM6. Now, we were very lucky to have David George come up and talk to us, and very lucky at the previous last year to have David George come up and talk to us and tell us about the constraints, the serious constraints that we face in the aquifer. Now, what I'm concerned about is when we were talking about the constraints section of it, and there was of the document set, and it talks about groundwater assessments. Our document says groundwater assessments by the council at this stage would be at considerable cost, and ultimately it's the responsibility of the Environment Agency to monitor and protect groundwater quality. We are talking about trying to reduce our housing number. We are talking about trying to identify constraints. Why are we not pursuing this? What is the indication of cost?
Thank you, I can answer that one. As you're aware, we've had various meetings with the Environment Agency and water companies, and the Whitchurch Conservation Group came along to the meeting with the Environment Agency and raised their concerns about groundwater. It was explained to us the regulatory process that goes through, and when a water company, if they need to upgrade their treatment processes to allow more development or for any other reason, they then have to apply for a permit to the Environment Agency. And if at that stage there's concern about groundwater, they would have to, if the water is wastewater is discharged to the groundwater, they have to do a groundwater risk assessment. So that's our understanding, and that's something that we will look at further through the Memorandum of Understanding. But generally, it's for the water company when they, or if they have to revise their permit, they would need to do the risk assessment. So we would need to work with the water companies and the Environment Agency on that to ensure that they're up to date on the amount of growth planned and what that means in terms of their permits and their treatment processes.
Thank you. You want a quick point on water?
If I may, just to add on to that, Councillor Andy McCormick has always bashed on about a reduction in use of water rather than talking just about the quality. And where will we see those standards within this? Because obviously there is a theoretical cap on what you should be using as an individual, but we ought to lower that so as the water use within us as a borough is substantially reduced. Can you just point me to that?
That's in our climate change policies, and we've got a target for water efficiency. Again, through our discussions with the water companies, it's become very clear that they've got their own targets to reduce water consumption as well, and I suspect that they will be responding to the local plan, our local plan, with that in mind as well. But Matt might be able to say specifically what number policy it is, but we have got it covered in our climate change policies.
Thank you. Don't need to know numbers, Matthew, don't worry. Andy, did you had your hand up or you're happy now? Yep, cool. All right then. Sam, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to explore a change that's been made in Track to Change Policy SS4. I wondered if the portfolio holder could explain why the principle of brownfield first had been abandoned. I thought we were all in favour of brownfield first, and it's rather strange to me that that's been cut out. I'd be appreciative of some explanation of that. And I wondered really whether it was linked to the lack of clarity on phasing and delivery that this documentation sets out. So I wanted to, how are those linked, and if that could be explained, please.
Thank you, Sam. So the point about brownfield first remains one of our guiding principles, and it now appears in policy SS1. So it's right at the front and has got more prominence. I think we've discussed the point about phasing before. Joe's raised the point that the numbers are constantly changing. We've also got a situation where we are genuinely consulting tonight on the spatial strategy and on the site selection process. So I think it's premature to start putting exact numbers in and talking about phasing before we finalise what the site selection process is going to be ahead of Regulation 18. We're here tonight to listen, so we're not going to prejudge that.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to SS5, neighbourhood planning. Any comments on those? Ken? Joe?
Thank you. I'll take this opportunity to make some comments that some people have made that we haven't got one in Tadley. We were recommended by council officers at the town council that in view of the DEPZ, there was little point in us spending an awful lot of time in actually producing a neighbourhood plan which said you can't have any houses. So that was why we didn't choose to do it. I don't know that that rule has changed very much because obviously apart from a few sites that I might think would be suitable in the centre of town for very small numbers, I doubt if we've got any more, and when I come to talk about Skates Lane, I will tell you why Tadley is full.
Thank you. Did you want to speak, Ken? Yeah.
Yeah, just on the neighbourhood planning, obviously Kingsclere are doing an update on the neighbourhood plan currently. How does that sit? Where does it sit and what protections does that provide those updates? Just so as I understand for my community.
At this stage, the policy doesn't change anything because obviously these are just evolving policies that have no weight, really. So it's the existing local plan that's always the key position for them. Having said that, as they move forward and review their plan, we will take that into account as this plan moves forward as well. So ideally, the two will move forward together and take each other into account, and that they'll be in line with each other.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Again, much like Ken, I just need to clarify something on the neighbourhood plan process to go back to my residents. Where we have made a site allocation of 0 to a settlement, how does that impact on the neighbourhood plan? Because I'm on the MPPF right now, paragraph 14, which says basically, I'll paraphrase, to get protection for a neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan contains policies and allocations to meet its identified housing requirement. How does that work if we have identified 0 housing requirement?
I mean, I think our view is that you need to do something proactive to trigger that protection, because there have been other villages within some parishes within the borough which have done neighbourhood plans. For example, sort of Witham St Lawrence and Ramsdale, who don't have a housing requirement at the moment, and they haven't allocated any sites within their plans. So it's a sort of similar scenario of a target of effectively 0 and planning for 0. And there's been no suggestion that they should get that protection with respect to the development as in para 14.
Sorry, Matt, just to clarify, where they haven't done a housing allocation, they have not got the protection?
No, para 14 is specific that you need to have policies to meet the requirement. Albeit I appreciate there's a challenge around when your requirement is 0.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to EM2, strategic gaps, where we've tried to define some strategic gaps now, where we didn't before.
What page?
21, that's where it starts. Or 105. 71 of 80 or 105, so. Yeah, she's brilliant, isn't she? Yeah, I should, perhaps she's a bit flat. So. Ken, far away.
Yeah, no, I welcome the inclusion of strategic gaps. I think it is important that there's no coalescence between some settlements, and I think it does add to the sense of place for some people. The difference between Tadley and Bohorse is quite pronounced, if I can say that in Joe's presence. The reality is that we do need to make sure that settlements are of themselves, so people do have a sense of community, a sense of identity, and we cannot allow the creeping development into other bits of other towns or other villages. I think it is important, and we have supported that through the DC. I think we rejected intrusions into the strategic gap, and I welcome this piece. I thought it was a very good piece of work, and allows us all to see something that we can genuinely get behind and protect. So well done.
Thank you. I echo those thoughts. David, yep.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo what Ken has said. I think strategic gaps, most probably after the housing number, are one of the most important policies that we have in this document. A fantastic piece of work. However, you're literally proposing building 600 homes in my ward in Sherwood St John's strategic gap. You're not actually saying what you're doing here. Let's absolutely spell out what you're doing with the housing allocations. You're currently greenlighting development in the current strategic gaps. You're promoting the coalescence of Sherwood St John and Basingstoke, and you're eroding the separate identity of Sherwood St John. Strategic gaps should be set in stone. I hate the word planning tool. This is fundamentally what our residents are talking about when they're talking about environments where they raise their children, where they go out walking with the dogs. This is the views, this is our heritage. We can't just chop and change these every 5 years when we go to update our plans. We really should be setting these in stone and saying that they are constant.
Does anybody want to come back on that, or no? Well, it's more of a statement, wasn't it? Really?
No, noted. I mean, I would point out that the allocations, the site selection is from the previous administration that we've inherited at the start. But I take your point, and it's something we will look at.
So now go on to appendices 2. Do you want a 10-minute break or 5-minute break? Is everybody? 2 minute, 5-minute break. Yeah. 5-minute break then. Thank you. thank you, members. Can reconvene. How did the committee want to play this? I don't think we're going to get through all the draft allocations sites in the next 20 minutes. Do you want to carry on to 10 or then see what happens? We've got an option date on the 28th of September where we can revisit some of these sites that we haven't gone through tonight. On what? Oh, right. I thought we finished that. Oh, yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Chair, if I could say perhaps it would be better to deal with all of the sites in one evening. And that would allow people who are interested in that to just come back and deal with that. And then perhaps if there is...
We can do the delivery and the timetable tonight, and then we maybe have the 28th on the sites. I know some members have come along just to speak about their wards and their sites, but I don't want to be here to 10:30, 11 o'clock debating it. I just don't think it's going to be good for debate and for well-being. So if we got that, we can do the delivery infrastructure and the timetable now, and your windfall sites, Ken.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, when Joe, if you could concentrate, please. You were terrible in class when you were young as well. The windfall completions, which is really important to small communities. When will this be updated? Because frankly, it doesn't take account of the 35 that have been delivered in Ashford Hill, the 27 that are currently being built, as Councillor Morrow said. In Headley, there are a number of houses in progress, plus all the PIPs and everything else. So this windfall doesn't really give us a view. It's only till 21, and really we do need to have a updated delivery note on that.
Yeah, it's the same case as what I've said before. It's from last year, so it's got a base date of 21. Clearly, as we move forward now, it will be updated to a base date of 2023. So it will capture everything that's got permission up to the 1st of April.
Thank you. So we're going to adjourn the the Appendix 2 draft allocation policy and concept plans to the 28th. Is that agreed? And we're going to go on to the infrastructure deliverable plan now. John?
Point of clarification, Mr. Chairman. The speakers that spoke earlier against the site allocation, and particularly, is all that information going to be captured so that when we come back on the 28th, we're going to remember what it was that all those people actually said? Because they did say quite a lot, and unless we sit and perhaps re-listen to the session, it's going to be quite difficult. It's quite a long way away for some of us in our memory.
I don't know whether we can have an interim sort of broad outline of what members of the public said for that meeting. It's on webcast, isn't it? So,
in terms of the minutes, obviously for an adjourned meeting, the minutes aren't available until in full, but probably I would have drafted at least that public speaking section, so maybe we could get that circulated, but that's on sort of the proviso that it is just draft wording at that point, and obviously you can't comment on it at committee.
We had a lot of councillors speaking from the wards. Would they be permitted to speak again? No. Fine, thank you.
with me. So we go on to the. Sorry, John.
Thanks, Gary. I'm not around on the 28th, so I'll give my apologies now. But I'll just ask a more broad question about delivery of the housing numbers and sites. Looking at the papers, it's understandable that a lot is going to depend upon being able to deliver some of the bigger sites. And obviously, I have some personal experience of that particular issue. But again, it's sort of it would be interesting to know at what point we're going to hear about the timing and delivery of some of the bigger sites, because the plan is now increasing the numbers of homes that are expected to be delivered on southern Manydown, and we know that southern Manydown is very much at an embryonic stage at the moment. Popham, again, 1,400 homes, and again, that's in its infancy, and it's an isolated settlement. We've already heard a lot of people, influential people in the administration, who are none too happy at the thought of east of Basingstoke and Lodge Farm coming forward. And you can see what I'm saying. I mean, one starts to struggle to know how one's actually going to deliver this rather huge number of houses. So specifically on Manydown South, there's reference to a landscape sensitivity study, and am I understanding it correctly that there's a view that this is an area of high landscape sensitivity and it's not suitable for significant development? So I saw that and I thought, wow, what are the implications of that? And the other one is you've made it clear that brownfield sites are going to remain priorities. Where are we on Overton Mill? Because that's capable, I think, of potentially delivering 260 homes, which is quite sizable, and is a brownfield site.
In terms of delivery, I mean, first we need to agree what sites we favour. So really, it's chicken and egg, isn't it? Really, with that, even though delivery obviously is a matter that you take into account when you're choosing the sites, but we need to consider those sites first. But yes, I mean, the phasing is obviously very important. That's part of the reason why the administration is considering the stepped approach, because if you've got allocations like Manydown and Popham in there, they will potentially take quite a while to come forward, as you say. So that step trajectory reflects that and gives time for the strategic sites. In terms of Overton Mill, as you know, that Overton's got a number in here for neighbourhood planning, so that's something that Overton community are considering at the minute in terms of looking at their neighbourhood plan, whether that's something they would allocate through that, whether it would come forward through the development management process. Either way, I mean, that number will be looked at and Overton Mill will be looked at, really, and if it does go forward, that would obviously help them or potentially exceed that Overton figure as we move forward.
Thank you. Can we move on to the infrastructure delivery plan? Does anybody want to introduce it, or are we just going to fire straight into it? Or we'll fire straight into it then, shall we? Is anybody going to talk about the introduction or the background, the national planning policy concept? No, on page 198. No. Page 201, funding new infrastructure. You do, Ken, far away.
Thank you. Obviously, the ability to put in infrastructure is really important. Now, we've already highlighted that the NHS requires money all the time. And can I just point out, when developers go to the NHS and say, we've got, what do you need? They can't allocate it straight to the NHS. It's got to be done through still payments. Now, is there anything that we can do to alter the infrastructure plan to allow the NHS to go direct to a developer, or put in a bid directly to the developer that we would see in DC? Because frankly, it seems a convoluted way that we ask what they want, the NHS says, yes, we need this, and actually the process is you've got to apply for it through SIL. I wonder, is there likely to be a quicker way to deliver infrastructure through this paper?
Well, I'm not precisely sure how to answer your question. I think it's worth sort of pointing out that the infrastructure delivery plan is a vehicle we're using to engage with all the infrastructure providers, including the NHS, to get a much clearer and better understanding about what their needs are and what their needs would be as a result of the growth that would be expected to take place. So by having that better understanding, it allows us and them to plan better for future needs, so that the infrastructure can be provided when it's required in a timely fashion.
Does that mean the NHS or anybody who requiring infrastructure, can they lay down a marker and say, we would like money if, I'm going to say contentiously, east of Basingstoke comes forward? Are they allowed to lay down markers for what they may or may not need, or does that have to be updated to the point where we're starting to deliver?
I think really that probably is sort of the purpose of the IDP in that by engaging with these stakeholders at this point, they are in effect laying down markers saying if that takes place, this would be required to mitigate that impact.
Thank you, Abdul.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Just in relation, just adding to Ken's point, in relation to the speed of having the infrastructure in place, specifically I'm talking here about transport, public transport, and school building as well. At the moment, we can see from the existing new development that was developed over the past few years, the schools are struggling. There is no enough capacity in public schools. So students, including my daughter, for example, has to travel all the way to Newbury to be able to find a place in secondary school, and that's not the only case. I've heard that from many people. Building school takes time. So what will happen is we will give the permission and the developers that we start to build up the new developments, and then there'll be many students who won't be able to find a place to go to. How would we go about this? And I can't find this identified in this policy. And also to add, I've spoken before about this and raised this issue, and I was made aware that there is we consult the Hampshire County Council, and they come back and say, I don't know, on ground in reality, that doesn't seem to be reflected. They say there is a place for every student, but I've come across many people who doesn't have a place for students in Basingstoke. So there's a mismatch here, and that also applies to public transport. The current situation of public transport is not great. It's not very reliable. So let alone want to have a new development. How could we, basically level up all those essential public services before we let the developer build up and people move in, and then the situation will become even worse. Thank you.
Well, with this discussion and with the infrastructure providers through the infrastructure delivery plan allows them to understand what's going to happen in the future and to make a more comprehensive plan for the infrastructure that's required to meet those needs in their totality. So whilst a site might come forward which wouldn't be large enough to require a school in its own right, the local education authority, by us having an updated local plan and having an infrastructure delivery plan, would know that there was potentially other development plan within that area, but to actually plan ahead to think, well, actually, although this development in front of us wouldn't require school, one would be required because of that wider cumulative need. So the IDP helps to advance those discussions to address the types of issues that you're raising.
Yep, far away, yeah.
Well, then, should I assume there would be provisions for developers that there is a certain standard of infrastructure and service in place before they actually deliver the units that they will build, or is it just again play by ear?
Well,
when the planning applications are submitted and determined, we will be engaging with those infrastructure providers about the fine detail of what's required and when it's required as well. So that would be sort of discussed on a more case by case basis, but to make sure the infrastructure is there when it's needed.
Sam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to look at, it was page 12, Transport T16. I was just a little bit sceptical about the categorisation of the improvements to the M3 strategic road junctions, M3, junction 6, 7 and 8. I just wondered why that was deemed essential rather than critical. Because obviously the plan as it's currently proposed wants to deliver a significant number of homes at many down north, many down south, and of course considerable traffic related to our new hospital. I'm just very keen to ensure that our infrastructure delivery plan in this section puts sufficient weight on whether the M3 is going to be able to manage the additional traffic. We don't want traffic capacity to be an issue that prevents our hospital coming forwards, given the number of homes that are also proposed. And we know too that with the recent Oakdown Farm application, the impact on highways was a significant factor. So I wondered whether we could explore whether that needs to be a critical priority and whether more thinking needs to go into that.
I certainly think there's a process whereby we can review and evolve this document going forward. I suggest that T16 has only been identified as essential in this particular draft because those improvements to junctions 7 and 8 have been identified being required beyond the plan period. So whilst its importance is recognised, it isn't critical to the delivery of the spatial strategy within the plan period up to 2040.
Dave?
Yeah, thanks. So I've got page 22 of 40, but I'm electronic, don't forget. So it's the one on primary education. Apologies, Echo 8, E8, expansion of existing primary schools to meet needs arising from new development. And we've got that highlighted in red. We've got that would require a policy change to allow section 106. It's obviously our policy, so I'm assuming we're looking to do that. We're going to change that if it's within our remit.
Well, it's within our remit to consider the relationship between SIL and section 106 and how the two work. The current means by which funding would be available to extend primary schools would be through a bid for part of the SIL pot, and that's something we're working on at the moment in terms of putting in place a process whereby internal infrastructure providers and also external infrastructure providers like the local education authority could bid for that funding.
Thank you. Joe?
Thank you. My question is about the sports facilities part. There is obviously a education here about the AGP that's going to be built at the Hurst, which is underway at the moment. While that's welcomed, it's not actually going to be a full-size pitch, so it won't actually deliver the needs of the people in my area. There is no mention of any other facilities in Chadley at all. I know we're not going to have any development, and that's part of the problem, is that we don't have any 106 money, and therefore we're unlikely to get any more sports pitches or any allocation of sports pitches, although we have got sites which could actually be further developed, because I actually run one of them, which is called Barlows Park, and it's a borough council, although it's in West Berkshire. I know that the sports strategy, the new one, is on its way. I've been promised it's been on its way for 5 years, is it? I've been on about 7 different consultations with different people on the phone, and I'm still waiting to see it. I know it's going to see the light of day shortly. But what we're not addressing here are where there's already a shortfall in the villages and the towns, where things haven't already happened. I think the last recreation study in Tadley showed that there was 22 hectares of pitches shortage. Since then, we've built 3 pitches, but we've lost 3 pitches. So we've gained absolutely nothing, and we may get the one at the Hurst. So I'd be interested to know what people are thinking about future and whether this ties in with the new plan that I haven't seen yet. So I'm not saying it's not in the plan because I don't know what's in the plan, but obviously I know that if things aren't in the plan, there's unlikely to be any money in the next 10 years for it. So it's a catch-22 here.
I'd say the infrastructure identified in this list has been identified in liaison with our colleagues in the sports and leisure team, informed by the recent LRNA work which has been done. But this focuses upon the sort of the more strategic bits of infrastructure rather than the sort of the smaller opportunities, which are multitudinous, which may be brought forward alongside these as well.
Obviously, Skates Lane, if it were to be in the plan, is 260 houses. It probably isn't big enough to be considered as a strategic site. However, the Bewley homes, which I have had various conversations with in public and in private, are not delivering anything to our infrastructure at all, because they have told us they are not going to. I'm not suggesting that, if we have houses, we need more pitches, but we will need more pitches because there are more people going to be coming into the area, and maybe that this is something that needs to be considered alongside what is currently a shortfall, never mind what's being added to.
Ken?
Thank you. It's just to got a wish list here, or possible delivery list. Let's hope it is. The funding for this, are you going to provide us with a quantum of what we're going to receive in SIL payments from each delivery site that we have? Because obviously that would be useful for a community, as Joe's just pointed out. Sometimes capital sums could do something to mitigate the development that is coming through, not necessarily in Tadley, but in lots of other places that may get the development. Because I think it would be useful to know what is going back into the community to pay for some of these things.
I think it's easy to forecast SIL rates in the short term, in terms of sites which are in the plan at the moment, or even if a windfall site comes for us, how much SIL will be yielded from that. I think in terms of looking at the sites in the local plan update, the borough's SIL rate will need to be reviewed alongside the local plan update anyway, because it needs to, for one thing, the current SIL charging schedule will be quite old at that time, but also we need to make sure that the SIL rate responds to all the new requirements that we're putting in the local plan update. The zero carbon homes, affordable housing, all those other types of infrastructure that we expect development to pay for. So because of that, it'd be difficult to say at this time what our SIL rates would be, post the adoption of the plan. That would be work which would take place alongside work looking at the viability of the local plan update. So it's really quite difficult to sort of pinpoint it would be a certain amount of money coming forward on a particular site in the future.
If we are likely to change SIL rates, when that might happen, because obviously that will affect development, I think that is important that we flag that early to developers, but also SIL rates may well affect viability for some of these things coming through, and that might put a downward pressure on the delivery of numbers. I'll just make that point. Have you got any comments on that?
Well, if as we're intending, we would review the SIL rate alongside the local plan. The SIL rate should be set at a level which is viable, and which shouldn't impact upon the delivery of housing. That will be the test for whether the SIL rate is appropriate, as to whether development is still viable and able to come forward.
On Mannydown North, we currently have a 0 SIL rate. Is that going to be reviewed as we deliver forward, because obviously that may well affect viability, and obviously it's already 30 years since we bought the land. Would that have to be reviewed, or because it's us doing our building and we are in charge of at least some nominal ability to deliver it, does that have to be reviewed, or are we content to move that forward as a zero?
Well, I don't think there's a particular opportunity to review the many down north sewer rate, because the site already benefits from outline planning consent and the infrastructure is secured through the Section 106 agreement.
Thank you. Sean?
Just very quickly going back to T16 that Councillor Carr raised. I just saw in the notes that it says potential long-term need post-2040. Now, should our hospital be placed near Junction 7, that would say that any improvements to Junction 7 would be possibly 10 years after the hospital has been built. So, am I right to be concerned about that?
Well, we would obviously do more detailed work around the hospital. We knew its precise details. This refers to some high-level work which has taken place, looking at the wider needs of that area and what the cumulative impacts would be, and identifying that the particular need to improve the motorway would not happen until beyond the plan period.
Thank you. Has any other members got any comments on the list in this?
I've got one other question on the green infrastructure. I know that we've spoken about this possibly in workshops and others, about allocating land potentially for community energy supplies, or like Cambridgeshire, there's a place in Cambridgeshire that's actually allocated a place next to a village so that all the villagers, instead of having oil-fired central heating, can have air source, ground source heat pumps on the outskirts, and it's pumped into their homes. And obviously we know that there's going to be some changes on the wind farms, and solar farms are obviously now promoting. But I haven't seen anything in here where we are specifically sort of putting pressure on some people to allocate sites. I did see that there was one site that mentioned, I think it was Popham, wasn't it, that's mentioning solar when I read the papers. But I can't see that in here. And whether or not we've had any thoughts about whether we should be proactive in looking for sites so that we can actually encourage green infrastructure. After all, we have got a climate emergency, and at declaration we should perhaps being a little bit more foresight, looking forward rather than waiting for people to come forward with where they think they should be. If we had an idea where we think they should be, but the best served by infrastructure and alongside villages. Community energy can provide some of these new housing building sites. They can actually provide the people with cheap power, because you build it next door to the houses at the same time and you build the houses alongside it. But there is an opportunity to get very small scale community infrastructure going in, such as they're looking at in Overton at the moment in Whitchurch, and which I happen to do in other places. So this is an opportunity for us to be right alongside the sites we are bringing forward.
Thank you. Point noted. Yep. Thank you. Kate?
Thank you, Chair. On page 38 of 40, the water and utilities comments. I don't understand why we would have improvements to ensure sufficient capacity and maintain water quality when we know it's lamentable. That really does need to be improved, and I'd certainly like it to be talked about all the river water bodies. So we've got tiny little pumping stations dotted around all over the place that surcharge regularly. I mean, I know there's one in Councilor McIntyre's ward that I was contacted by a resident, and it was disgraceful, absolutely shocking. That needs to be well and truly trapped in every sense.
So yeah, that needs beefing up. Yeah. Ken?
Thank you. If we can move past our requirements on that to the green infrastructure, and picking up Councillor Slimmon's point. Michael Gove's decision to have onshore wind turbines, I think, is very important to us. And I think I've been on many things to say that at the top of Hannington we have a tower, which was already a blight on the landscape. What work will you do to see if there is an opportunity to have onshore wind at a place where it's all, it's the highest point? There's a wind tunnel coming up through Watership Down. What work are you going to do to try and improve our take on the green infrastructure that is required?
Just on that, we are due to commission work consultants to actually identify areas that are suitable for renewable energy, so we can then include that within the policies.
I presume you won't be looking at hot air that I produce in my wards.
Thank you for that comment. Any more? Should we go on to the timetable if everybody's happy with that deliverable? So, timetable's back on the executive summary. I think it's page 30.
Mr. Chairman, on the 12th of October, the delivery of...
I know I wasn't going work program. I was just going for the timetable on.
Oh, sorry.
On this local plan. So it's on page 30, page 23, like page 20 of 23. See all these different numbers. If any members got any comments on the timetable, the administrations.
If we get some more from Michael Gove on where will we just position it as it fits into our timetable as agreed here? Is that how we see it?
Yes, we'll keep it under review.
Thank you. So that's that item. So we've got obviously the draft housing allocations. We're going to look at the 28th. Does members want to look at while we're here at future work programme, or? Yeah, because it's quite sparse at the moment. Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. Sorry, Sam?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wondered whether, while we're discussing work programme, we might be able to seek a paper and an update from the relevant portfolio holder on the status of our major projects at the moment. Obviously, we've got a report on the town centre strategy coming forwards in February. But for me, the key questions that aren't addressed in this work programme are status of Basingstoke, Leisure Park, Ice Rink, Aquadrome. I'd be very keen for a paper to come forwards to this committee or the relevant committee on those items, please.
I concur with that. Is that possible in the near future?
There's already an item on the CP work programme for the Leisure Park and Aquadrome, so it would just be Basingstoke that would need to be picked up, because there is an item.
Economic, so we're an economic committee, so if,
and that could be perhaps incorporated probably the town centre strategy one.
And it would be useful to understand as a committee where we are on big regeneration projects, housing regeneration projects. Obviously, for Many Down, we have the Many View Overview Committee, and I know that's progressing. But for me, the questions are, where is this administration on Winklebury? Where is this administration on Buckskin and Southam?
sure, I mean, as Southam, we have a meeting with Sovereign in a couple of weeks' time with officers and portfolio holders to see where we're going, because we've been stagnating for a number of years. But yeah, we'll be good to have an update for this committee to where we are actually on regeneration. Is that, can we fit that into possible for November? Yeah. I think this is it, isn't it? Or yeah. I think there's consensus that we want to look at where we are with our regeneration in our estate. Yeah. So that's one topic. If we can try and get that into November. October, we've got delivery affordable housing strategy. We haven't got anything for January at the moment. But get your thinking heads on. All right, so if we've got no more suggestions, well, thank you for your attendance tonight. We meet back on the 28th. Sorry.
Can I just remind members that have hard copies to keep hold of them for the adjourned meeting because they won't be reissued.
So I apologise to members we didn't go on to the substantial areas, and you've probably been waiting all night to get into your nitty-gritty of your areas, but you know. Yeah, I know, yeah. So we'll deal with it on the 28th. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.